It began with a ridge that refused to bend, and a division that refused to move. Elsenborn Ridge did not look heroic. It did not rise dramatically above the land. It did not announce itself with sweeping views or monumental height. It was simply there, a stretch of high ground overlooking frozen roads and dark forests in eastern Belgium. And in December of 1944, that quiet ridge became the immovable object against which the German Ardennes offensive finally broke its own momentum. The 99th Infantry Division arrived in this sector with no expectation of making history. They were new, they were young, they were told they were holding a quiet stretch of front. Many had never heard artillery fired in anger. Many had never fought a winter battle. Their positions were thin, their confidence untested, and their sector underestimated by friend and enemy alike. What they did not know was that they were standing directly in the path of the main German thrust, and that the ground beneath their boots would soon matter more than anywhere else in the Ardennes. When the offensive began, it came like a sudden storm. Artillery tore through the darkness. Infantry emerged from forests believed impassable. Armor pushed toward roads that led west. The shock was immediate. Nearby units were pushed back. Villages fell. Confusion spread faster than orders. For many formations, the first days of the offensive were about survival and regrouping. But on Elsenborn Ridge, something different happened. The 99th Infantry Division did not collapse. It did not retreat. It dug in. The ridge offered defensive advantages, elevation, fields of fire, observation, but advantages mean nothing without resolve. And under relentless pressure, that resolve hardened. German attacks came in waves, probing, then striking harder, supported by artillery and armor. Snow fell constantly, concealing movement and freezing men where they stood. Visibility vanished, sound distorted. The cold punished everyone equally. The 99th held anyway. Infantry fought from foxholes cut into frozen earth. Machine guns fired until barrels overheated, then froze. Artillery answered attack after attack, even as ammunition ran low. German units assaulted the ridge repeatedly, believing that one more push would break the line. It never did. Every failure cost time. Every failed assault burned fuel, and men the offensive could not afford to lose. And time was everything. The Ardennes offensive depended on speed, on breaking through quickly, on reaching the Meuse before defenses could form. Elsenborn Ridge denied that speed completely. While chaos unfolded elsewhere, the ridge became an anchor. It absorbed pressure that should have surged west. It forced German forces to commit elite units into frontal attacks they could not win. It preserved artillery positions that dominated surrounding roads. And because the ridge held, supply routes behind it remained secure, allowing reinforcements to flow where they were needed most. The 99th Infantry Division did not just survive the battle, it shaped it. As days passed, German attacks weakened, losses mounted, momentum stalled. The ridge remained in American hands, battered, frozen, and scarred, but intact. And as the offensive slowed and then reversed, historians would trace the turning point back to this ground and this division. Elsenborn Ridge mattered because it was held early, held stubbornly, held without retreat. It proved that even in surprise, even under overwhelming pressure, defense could stop a plan built on speed. It showed that discipline and terrain could defeat ambition. And it demonstrated that sometimes the most decisive actions of a war come not from sweeping advances, but from refusing to give ground at the exact moment it matters most. Tonight, we return to that ridge, to the frozen foxholes and relentless shelling, to the young division that was never supposed to stop an offensive, and did, to the place where the Battle of the Bulge quietly began to fail. Before we continue, let me pause and bring you into this moment as well. Where in the world are you listening from right now, and what time has found you there? Is it late into the night, early morning, or that quiet hour where everything slows down? If stories like this help you unwind, focus, or feel grounded by listening to moments where ordinary people held firm under extraordinary pressure, consider subscribing, not just to follow history, but to keep a place where these long, steady journeys are always waiting for you when the world finally goes quiet. Settle in. This is the story of the 99th Infantry Division and the ridge that would not move. November 15th, 1942. Camp Van Dorn, Mississippi. A raw wind cuts across the parade ground as 14,000 young men stand in formation for the first time, shoulders touching, boots sinking into red clay mud. They come from 48 states, farm boys and factory workers, college students and coal miners, strangers to each other and to war. The median age is 19 years, 3 months. Most have never been more than 50 miles from home. None of them know that in 2 years they will stand against the largest German offensive on the Western Front, that their youth will be tested in ways that will break veteran divisions, or that history will nearly forget them entirely. The sergeant major calls the division to attention. The 99th Infantry Division officially exists. What follows will transform these teenagers into one of the most tested American units of World War II, a division that will hold when others break, that will delay an entire Panzer army with nothing but rifles and resolve, and whose story will be buried for 36 years because the truth makes powerful men uncomfortable. The swampland of southern Mississippi seems an unlikely crucible for creating soldiers. Camp Van Dorn squats in isolation, deliberately positioned in terrain that offers nothing but hardship. Humidity chokes the air, mosquitoes swarm in clouds. The ground alternates between dust that fills lungs and mud that swallows equipment. This is intentional. The Army wants these boys to suffer now so they might survive later. 14,253 men report for duty that November, pulled from draft boards and recruiting stations across the nation. 70% are draftees, men who never volunteered for any of this. 30% stepped forward themselves, seeking adventure or escape or purpose. They arrive in waves by train and bus, carrying cardboard suitcases and lunch bags from mothers who cannot imagine where their sons are going. The assembly is chaos. No one knows their unit assignment. No one knows their barracks. Farm boys from Montana stand beside Jewish intellectuals from Brooklyn. Mexican Americans from Texas beside Italian Americans from Boston. The only thing they share is youth and uncertainty. In December, they receive their symbol. The shoulder patch arrives in boxes, stacks of cloth diamonds stitched with a black and white checkerboard pattern. A supply sergeant distributes them without ceremony or explanation. The design is distinctive, 9 squares alternating in a pattern meant to symbolize strength through diversity, unity from difference. The men pin them to their uniforms with a mixture of pride and confusion. They do not yet understand what it means to wear these colors, what blood will soak into this fabric, what ground these patches will cover from Belgian forests to German pillboxes. For now, it is simply identification, a way to distinguish themselves from the 98 divisions that came before. But the checkerboard will come to mean something. It will mark them as the division that refused to break at Elsenborn Ridge. It will identify bodies frozen in Ardennes snow. It will be sewn onto prison uniforms when men are captured, a target for German guards who learn to hate this particular pattern. Decades later, old men will weep when they see it, unable to explain to grandchildren why a simple geometric design carries such weight. The training begins with brutality that seems designed to break rather than build. Winter 1943 brings cold that the Deep South should not possess. Temperatures that crack water pipes and frost the ground. The men march 20 miles with full packs, rifles held at port arms until shoulders scream. They crawl through obstacle courses strung with barbed wire, live ammunition snapping overhead, sergeants screaming that this is nothing compared to what waits across the ocean. They dig foxholes in ground that fights the shovel, only to have officers order them filled and dug again 3 feet to the left. The point is not the hole. The point is learning that orders must be followed even when they make no sense, especially when they make no sense. Men collapse from exhaustion. 7 die in training accidents during the Louisiana maneuvers, killed by mistakes and equipment failures and the simple chaos of teaching teenagers to make war. Their names go on a memorial that will be dwarfed by what comes later. But in the spring of 1943, these 7 are the entire cost, and it seems almost unbearable. General Walter E. Lauer arrives in the summer, and everything changes. He is 47 years old, a veteran of the First World War, a man whose face rarely shows emotion, but whose eyes constantly calculate. Lauer believes the next war will not be fought in daylight. He has read the intelligence reports from North Africa and Sicily. He understands that the German Wehrmacht has perfected night operations, that American divisions have been repeatedly caught unprepared in darkness, slaughtered because they trained only for battles they could see. So, Lauer begins an experiment. The 99th will train at night. They will learn to navigate without light, to communicate in whispers, to fight when visibility drops to arm's length. The other divisions mock this. Officers from established units visit Camp Van Dorn and shake their heads at the waste of time and resources. Everyone knows modern war requires air support, armor coordination, artillery preparation. All of these depend on seeing the target. Training for night combat is training for conditions that will never matter. Lauer ignores them. Night after night, the 99th stumbles through forests and swamps, learning to trust sound and touch, learning to function when fear magnifies every shadow. They earn their first nickname that summer. Battle babies, the other divisions call them, a term dripping with contempt. The 99th has the youngest average age in the United States Army, 19 years and 2 months. The 82nd Airborne averages 22. The 1st Infantry Division averages 24. 3 years might not seem significant, but in military terms, it represents the difference between men and boys, between soldiers who have lived enough to understand death and teenagers who still believe themselves immortal. The 99th embraces the nickname with defiant pride, the way the condemned might laugh at the gallows. They paint battle babies on barrack walls. They shout it during marches. If the Army and the other divisions want to dismiss them as children playing soldier, fine. They will prove everyone wrong or die trying. What none of them understand yet is how literally true this might become, how many will never reach their 20th birthday, how the nickname will transform from mockery to prophecy. By October 1943, the division has taken shape. 14,000 men have been forged into 3 infantry regiments, the 393rd, 394th, and 395th, plus artillery battalions, engineer companies, medical detachments, all the machinery required to make a division function. They have trained for 23 months, longer than many divisions that have already deployed. They are as ready as training can make them, but readiness is theoretical. No amount of crawling under barbed wire in Mississippi prepares a man for the sound of an actual bullet cracking past his skull. No night exercise in Louisiana swamps can replicate the terror of defending a position when you know the enemy has tanks and you have only rifles. The men sense this gap between training and reality. They write letters home that try to sound confident but cannot quite hide the fear underneath. They joke and drink and fight in the way young men do when they need to prove they are not afraid. And they wait for orders that will take them to the war, orders that finally arrive in the summer of 1944. The checkerboard division that marches onto transport ships in New York Harbor in October 1944 bears little resemblance to the mob that assembled 2 years earlier. They move with precision now, equipment properly secured, faces harder than faces should be at 19. The officers have drummed into them every lesson that blood purchased in North Africa and Italy and France. Take care of your weapon before yourself. Dig your foxhole before you sleep. Never bunch up. Never silhouette yourself on a ridgeline. Trust the man beside you because he is all that stands between you and death. These lessons are theoretical still. Knowledge without experience. Rules recited but not yet written in memory with the ink of survival. The ships pull away from the dock on October 5th, 1944. Families wave from the pier until they become dots and then nothing. Most of these soldiers will never see American soil again, will lie forever in foreign ground under white crosses that their mothers will never be able to afford to visit. But on October 5th, they still believe in their own survival. Everyone believes they will be the one who makes it home. The Atlantic crossing takes 5 days, a brief window between the known world and what comes after. The men play cards and write letters and vomit into buckets when the seas turn rough. They speculate endlessly about where they are going, what they will face, whether the war might end before they arrive. The news from Europe sounds promising. Paris has been liberated, the Allies have crossed into Belgium. Some soldiers openly discuss whether Germany might surrender by Christmas, whether the 99th might spend the war in occupation duty, guarding prisoners and directing traffic. The veterans among them, the sergeants who fought in the First World War, say nothing. They have heard this optimism before. They remember when everyone said the Great War would be over by Christmas 1914, and how it ground on for 4 more years, swallowing a generation. They smoke cigarettes and watch the young men make plans for a future that may not exist. On October 10th, 1944, England appears through the fog, green hills rising from gray water. The 99th Infantry Division has arrived in the European theater of operations. They have 26 days before they enter combat. It will not be enough. The transformation from training division to combat unit happens invisibly, a shift in how men carry themselves, how they speak, how they prepare. In England, the final briefings begin. Officers spread maps across tables, pointing to a section of the Belgian-German border called the Ardennes. It is, they explain, a quiet sector. The Germans have stripped it of veteran units, sending them to defend against the Soviet advance in the east. What remains in the Ardennes are old men and teenagers, second-rate Volksgrenadier divisions that pose minimal threat. The 99th will take over this sector from exhausted units that need rest. It will be, the officers promise, an ideal place for a green division to gain experience without facing serious danger. The men listen and believe because they want to believe, because the alternative is too frightening to consider. They clean their rifles one more time. They write one more letter home. They try to sleep but mostly fail, lying in darkness as the hours count down to deployment. None of them can know that the quiet sector they are about to enter is the precise location where Hitler is massing 250,000 men for the largest German offensive of the war. None of them can imagine that their youth and inexperience, the very qualities that make them battle babies, will become the attributes that allow them to survive what veteran divisions cannot. The checkerboard has formed. Soon it will be tested in ways its creators never imagined. October 10th, 1944. Dorchester, England. British locals gather along the road as American trucks roll through their village, craning their necks to see the soldiers who will help finish the war. What they see makes them uncomfortable. These Americans look impossibly young, faces still soft with adolescence, bodies thin beneath uniforms that seem cut for larger men. A shopkeeper mutters to his neighbor that these boys should be in school, not heading to war. The soldiers stare back with a mixture of defiance and uncertainty, aware they are being judged and found wanting. They have traveled 3,000 miles to fight for freedom, and the first reaction they receive is pity. The trucks continue east towards Southampton, where ships wait to carry them across the channel. But something strange is happening in the shadows of this deployment, a deception so carefully constructed that even the 99th Infantry Division does not fully understand its role. While 14,000 real soldiers prepare to enter Belgium, a phantom division is being created in their image, a ghost army designed to fool the most sophisticated intelligence service in Europe. The deception will work better than anyone expects. It will convince German commanders that the 99th is nowhere near the battlefield when the attack comes, and that miscalculation will cost Germany any chance of reaching the Meuse River. The village of Dover sits on England's southern coast, white cliffs rising above gray water, the narrowest point between Britain and occupied Europe. Throughout October 1944, German reconnaissance aircraft photographed this area daily, looking for signs of Allied buildup. What they see confirms their suspicions. A full American infantry division has arrived in Dover, identifiable by the distinctive checkerboard shoulder patch on soldiers photographed by long-range cameras. Radio traffic intercepts reveal division-level communications, encrypted messages that German cryptographers partially decode, confirming the 99th Infantry Division is preparing for deployment. Intelligence reports flow to Wehrmacht headquarters in Berlin, where analysts update their maps, placing a pin in Dover labeled 99th ID. The division, German intelligence concludes, will require at least 3 months of additional training in England before it is combat ready. This assessment is based on standard protocols, on experience with American divisions, on the reasonable assumption that green troops need extensive preparation before facing veteran Wehrmacht soldiers. Every part of this assessment is wrong, but it is wrong in ways that seem right, and that is what makes the deception perfect. 200 miles north of Dover, the actual 99th Infantry Division boards transport ships in Southampton. The port is blacked out, all movement happening in darkness to avoid German observation. Soldiers file up gangplanks in silence, equipment muffled, officers hissing orders in whispers. The ship slip moorings at midnight, November 3rd, 1944, sailing without lights across the English Channel. By dawn, they are approaching Ostend, Belgium, where trucks wait to carry them east toward the German border. The entire movement happens in 26 days, faster than any previous American division's deployment. This speed is possible only because General Lauer insisted on advanced training in Mississippi, because the 99th drilled endlessly in rapid mobilization, because every officer and sergeant knows exactly what to do without requiring orders. But the speed creates a problem. If the real 99th reaches Belgium in early November, and German intelligence believes it is still in Dover, the deception will collapse the moment the division enters combat, unless someone maintains the Phantom. The unit that remains in Dover is officially designated the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, but soldiers call it the Ghost Army. 1,100 men, artists and actors and engineers, specialists in inflatable tanks and recorded sound effects and elaborate theatrical deception. They have been running similar operations since D-Day, impersonating entire divisions, creating fake army groups out of rubber and paint and radio broadcasts. For the 99th operation, they deploy their full arsenal. Inflatable trucks bear the checkerboard insignia, positioned where German reconnaissance can photograph them. Radio operators broadcast using the 99th's call signs and encryption patterns, filling the airwaves with fake traffic about supply requests and training schedules. Actors wearing 99th shoulder patches frequent Dover pubs, speaking loudly about their unit, ensuring local civilians will report American soldiers still in the area. The deception is layered, redundant, designed to create multiple independent confirmations that all point to the same false conclusion. And it works flawlessly. Throughout November and into December, German intelligence reports continue to place the 99th in Dover, updating the estimated combat-ready date from January to February 1945. This intelligence failure creates a cascade of miscalculations in German planning. When Hitler and his generals finalized the plan for Operation Autumn Fog, the massive offensive through the Ardennes, they based their assessments on what they believe about Allied dispositions. The sector assigned to 6th Panzer Army, the northern thrust of the offensive, appears thinly defended. A few depleted American divisions, exhausted from months of combat, hold a front that stretches too far with too few men. German planners do not account for the 99th because their intelligence says it is not there. They do not reinforce the assault units assigned to this sector because they see no need. The attack, they believe, will break through weak defenses in hours, not days. Panzer columns will race west to the Meuse River, cutting off Allied armies, creating the conditions for a negotiated peace. Every part of this plan depends on accurate intelligence, and the intelligence about the 99th Infantry Division is catastrophically wrong. The real division arrives in Belgium on November 9th, 1944, and immediately senses something unsettling about their assignment. They are ordered to take over a 20-mile section of front from the 2nd Infantry Division, a unit that has been fighting since D-Day. Standard doctrine calls for divisions to defend 5 to 6 miles of front, allowing for proper concentration of forces, adequate reserves, overlapping fields of fire. 20 miles is impossible to defend properly. The men spread out along the line, digging foxholes in the dense Ardennes forest, and realize they can barely see the next position. Gaps of hundreds of yards separate units. Artillery support is limited because there are not enough guns to cover such a wide area. Officers protest to higher command, pointing out the dangerous exposure. They are told the sector is quiet, that German forces opposite them are minimal, that this is precisely why a Green Division can handle it. The 99th accepts these assurances because they have no choice, because orders are orders, because they are new to war and assume their commanders know better. They dig their foxholes deeper. They string communication wire through the trees. They establish patrol patterns and observation posts, and they wait, unaware that across the Aar River, in the German-held territory they watch through binoculars, 250,000 men are assembling in the darkness. The deception in Dover continues through November, even as the real 99th settles into their Belgian positions. The Ghost Army expands their performance, adding new elements to maintain credibility. Fake supply convoys roll through Dover with the checkerboard insignias painted on the canvas-covered trucks that contain nothing but air. Training exercises are announced in local newspapers, complete with fictional details about upcoming maneuvers. German spies in England, the few who remain undetected, report back that the 99th is definitely still in Dover. They have seen the trucks and soldiers themselves. These reports confirm what German intelligence already believes, creating a closed loop of false confirmation. Meanwhile, in Belgium, the 99th begins to notice troubling signs. Patrol reports indicate increased German activity across the river, movement at night, the sound of vehicles and equipment. A German deserter captured on November 15th claims major forces are massing for an offensive. His interrogation report is forwarded to First Army headquarters and promptly dismissed as exaggeration or disinformation. After all, German intelligence shows they are incapable of offensive operations. The warning dies in a filing cabinet. By late November, some officers in the 99th begin to suspect their sector is not as quiet as advertised. Captain Charles MacDonald, commanding a rifle company in the 23rd Infantry Regiment temporarily attached to the 99th's area, writes in his diary that something feels wrong. Too many signs of enemy buildup, too much radio traffic. Too many nights when the sound of tracked vehicles echoes from the German side. He reports his concerns through proper channels and receives reassurance that intelligence has the situation under control. The Germans opposite them are second-rate Volksgrenadier units, old men and boys, no cause for alarm. What MacDonald and the other skeptics cannot know is that their instincts are correct, but their intelligence is sabotaged by success elsewhere. The Phantom Division in Dover has done its job too well. German commanders believe what their intelligence tells them, that the 99th is not a factor, and this belief has infected Allied intelligence in reverse. If the Germans are not worried about this sector, the thinking goes, there must be no threat. Both sides are wrong in perfectly complementary ways. The last days of November bring the first snow to the Ardennes, thick flakes that muffle sound and reduce visibility. The 99th hunkers in their foxholes, learning to hate the cold that seeps through every layer of clothing, that turns fingers numb and makes rifles difficult to operate. They have been in position for 3 weeks now, long enough for the initial fear to fade into boredom, long enough for routine to replace vigilance. Patrols probe into no man's land and return reporting nothing unusual. Guards pull 4-hour shifts staring into darkness and see only trees. The few clashes with German patrols are brief, inconclusive, the kind of minor contact that happens along any front line. Officers begin to believe the sector really is quiet, that perhaps this will be an easy introduction to combat, a chance to gain experience without catastrophic losses. They do not know that across the river, in the town of Prüm, the 12th SS Panzer Division Hitler Youth has just completed its move into assault positions, that the 1st SS Panzer Division Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler is right behind them, that the entire 6th Panzer Army is coiled like a spring waiting for the order to release. On December 15th, 1944, the final German intelligence update before the offensive confirms the 99th Infantry Division remains in Dover, England. Combat deployment not expected before February. This assessment is distributed to all Wehrmacht commanders in the West, including those preparing to attack through the Ardennes. They plan their assault accordingly, allocating forces based on the assumption that the American defenses are weak and unprepared. At that exact moment in Belgium, the actual 99th occupies every foot of the 20-mile sector the Germans believe is lightly held. 14,000 American soldiers, most still teenagers, most who have never fired a shot in combat, stand directly in the path of the largest German offensive on the Western Front. The Phantom Division has done its job perfectly. German forces will hit the 99th expecting minimal resistance. They will discover their intelligence was wrong exactly when it is too late to adjust their plans. The deception did not prevent the attack, but it ensured the attackers would be surprised by what they found, would be delayed by resistance they never anticipated, would waste hours and then days trying to overcome defenses that should not have existed. In war, hours matter. Days can change everything. The Ghost Army in Dover never fires a shot, but their performance will help save the entire Allied offensive in the West. Sometimes the greatest victories come from battles never fought, from enemies deceived rather than destroyed. The 99th Infantry Division is about to learn this lesson in the hardest way possible. November 9th, 1944. Elsenborn Ridge, Belgium. Lieutenant Lyle Buch stands at the edge of a forest so dense that midday looks like twilight, trees pressing together in a mass of pine and spruce that the locals call the Green Hell. He is 21 years old, which makes him ancient by the standards of the 99th Infantry Division, and he commands the intelligence and reconnaissance platoon of the 394th Infantry Regiment. His mission brief is simple: move east to the village of Lanzerath, observe the German positions across the Our River, report any unusual activity. Do not engage unless absolutely necessary. Buch studies the map and feels the first cold touch of doubt. Lanzerath sits directly on the Belgian-German border, the last American position before enemy territory. His 18-man platoon will be the furthest forward element of the entire division. Eyes watching the darkness, alone on a crossroads that the map designates as tactically insignificant. The forest swallows sound. The trees block radio signals. If something goes wrong at Lanzerath, help might not arrive in time. Buch folds the map and gathers his men. They move east into the Green Hell, unaware they are walking toward the single most important 18-man position in the Battle of the Bulge. The Ardennes in November is a study in hostility. The forest fights every step, roots grabbing boots, branches whipping faces, undergrowth thick enough to hide entire units. The 99th spreads across 20 miles of this terrain, from the town of Hofen in the north to Lanzerath in the south, a frontage that violates every principle of defensive warfare. Standard doctrine calls for divisions to defend 5 to 6 miles, allowing for proper concentration of forces, overlapping fields of fire, adequate reserves to plug gaps. 20 miles is indefensible by any reasonable calculation. But the 99th has no choice. They are filling a sector vacated by the 2nd Infantry Division, a veteran unit pulled back for rest after months of continuous combat. The 2nd held this line with difficulty. The 99th must hold it with fewer men and no experience. The division commander, Major General Walter Lauer, protests the assignment, pointing out the mathematical impossibility of adequate defense. He is overruled by V Corps headquarters, which assures him the sector is quiet, that German forces opposite are minimal, that this is ideal for breaking in a green division. Lauer accepts the orders and deploys his 3 regiments as best he can. The 393rd takes the northern sector around Hofen. The 395th holds the center. The 394th anchors the south, with Buch's platoon pushed furthest east as the division's early warning system. The village of Lanzerath consists of 20 houses, a church, and a cafe, clustered around a crossroads where 2 roads meet. One road runs north toward Elsenborn, the other runs east toward Germany and the town of Losheim. These roads matter more than the village itself. Whoever controls Lanzerath controls access to the network of roads behind American lines, the routes needed to move troops and supplies, the arteries that feed the entire northern shoulder of the Allied advance. German military planners have studied this crossroads extensively. American planners have barely noticed it. When Buch arrives with his 18 men on November 20th, he finds no prepared defenses, no foxholes, no wire, nothing. He requisitions a map and realizes with growing alarm that his platoon is expected to observe a frontage of 3 miles. Impossible for 18 men. He requests reinforcement or, at minimum, some anti-tank weapons. Both requests are denied. The sector is quiet, observation only. Do not engage. Buch assigns his best men to the forward positions, sets up a command post in a small log cabin just west of the crossroads, and begins the waiting that defines soldier life. The waiting reveals patterns. Every night, Buch's men hear sounds from across the Our River, the unmistakable rumble of tracked vehicles, the clank of metal on metal that could only be tanks or tank destroyers. They report this in their daily intelligence summaries, dutifully noting time, direction, estimated number of vehicles. The reports go to battalion, then regiment, then division headquarters. Nothing comes back. No change in orders, no increased alert status, no explanation. After 2 weeks, Buck begins to wonder if anyone is reading his reports at all. On December 10th, his listening posts pick up something new. German voices, many of them, carrying across the cold night air. The sound of units moving into position, of officers giving orders, of equipment being positioned. One of Buch's men, Private First Class William James, speaks German, and he translates fragments. Infantry units, heavy weapons, references to ammunition distribution. James estimates at least a battalion-sized force has moved into the woods opposite Lanzerath, possibly more. Buch writes this in his report, marks it urgent, and waits. The response arrives 24 hours later. Assessment. Normal defensive rotations, no cause for alarm. December 15th brings the warning everyone will later claim to have heard, but no one acts upon. A German deserter, a private from the 12th Volksgrenadier Division, crosses American lines near the Losheim Gap and surrenders to the 99th's forward positions. During interrogation, he tells a story that should have triggered every alarm in First Army. His division, he claims, has been pulled back from the front and replaced by elite Fallschirmjäger paratroop units. Behind them, the deserter says, are massed panzer divisions, hundreds of tanks, artillery beyond counting. The attack will come soon, perhaps days, a massive offensive aimed at breaking through to the Meuse River. The interrogator files his report, noting the deserter seems genuine, his information specific and consistent. The report reaches V Corps headquarters on the afternoon of December 15th. An intelligence officer reads it, makes a note in the margin about unconfirmed claims from unreliable source, and files it in the growing stack of reports about German activity in the Ardennes. No alert is issued, no additional reconnaissance is ordered. The German deserter is sent to a rear area prisoner camp, and his warning disappears into the bureaucratic machinery of war. At Lanzerath, Buch knows nothing of this. He watches the German positions through binoculars, counts the increased number of sentries, notes the fresh tracks in the snow, and wonders why headquarters seems so unconcerned about what appears to him like obvious preparation for attack. The Ardennes sector has been designated a rest area by Allied planners, a quiet zone where exhausted units can recover, and green units can gain experience without facing serious threat. This assessment is based on sound reasoning. The Ardennes forest is poor terrain for offensive operations. The roads are few and easily defended. The weather in winter makes mechanized warfare difficult. The Germans, everyone agrees, would never attack here. They lack the fuel for a major offensive. They lack the manpower. They lack the time. Every strategic indicator suggests German forces are conserved for defending against the inevitable Allied drive into the Rhineland. What the planners fail to consider is that these same factors make the Ardennes the perfect place for a surprise attack, precisely because everyone believes it impossible. Hitler and his generals have studied Allied dispositions carefully. They know the Ardennes is lightly held. They know American commanders consider it a backwater. They are betting everything on the assumption that surprise will compensate for Allied superiority in numbers and equipment. And they are positioning their forces opposite the newest, youngest, least experienced American division on the Western Front. The forest itself becomes an enemy as November turns to December. Temperatures drop below freezing. Snow falls in thick blankets that muffle sound and reduce visibility to yards. The men of the 99th learn to hate the cold with an intensity that surprises them, a bone-deep chill that no amount of clothing can stop. That makes simple tasks like cleaning a rifle or opening a ration can into exercises in pain. Trench foot begins to appear, feet rotting inside boots that cannot be removed often enough to dry. Officers rotate men back to rear areas for warm meals and showers, but the rotation is too slow, the needs too great. Companies that should number 200 men operate with 150. The rest in aid stations being treated for cold injuries. The forest watches all of this with indifference. Ancient trees that have seen armies before, that will see armies again. The locals, Belgian farmers and foresters who know this land, watch the Americans dig their foxholes and shake their heads. They remember 1914, when German armies poured through these same forests. They remember how quickly the front moved, how little warning there was. They try to tell the young American soldiers to be careful, that these woods have swallowed better armies than this. But the language barrier defeats them, and the soldiers are too busy with their own misery to listen. By mid-December, the 99th has been in position for 5 weeks, long enough for the initial fear to fade, long enough for boredom to replace vigilance. Patrols report the same thing every day. No significant enemy activity. Minor contact. Situation unchanged. The routine becomes numbing. Wake before dawn. Stand to at defensive positions. Daylight patrols. Return. Clean weapons. Eat cold rations. Sleep in frozen foxholes. Repeat. Soldiers begin to believe this is what war is. Endless waiting, punctuated by discomfort. A test of endurance rather than courage. The veterans from the 2nd Division, the ones still in the area helping with the transition, know better. They watch the 99th settle into routines and worry. Routine is what gets soldiers killed. Complacency is the enemy's best weapon. But they are rotating out, heading to rear areas for the rest they have earned, and their warnings stay with them. On December 15th, the last elements of the 2nd Division pull out. The 99th Infantry Division stands alone on the 20-mile front, 14,000 teenagers against whatever the forest holds. At Lanzerath, Buch's platoon has developed its own rhythms. 2 men always on watch at the forward positions. 2 more monitoring the radio, trying to maintain contact through the interference the trees create. The rest sleep or clean weapons or write letters home. They have been here 4 weeks now, watching the same crossroads, seeing nothing happen. The log cabin that serves as their command post has become familiar, almost comfortable. Someone found a deck of cards. Someone else liberated a bottle of schnapps from an abandoned German position. They play cards and drink in small sips and tell stories about home, about girls left behind, about what they will do when the war ends. These are children playing at being soldiers, and they know it, and they resent it, and they cannot change it. Buch watches them and feels the weight of command, the knowledge that these 18 lives are his responsibility, that any mistake he makes will be paid for in blood. He is 21 years old, barely older than the men he leads, and he has never been in combat. None of them have. On the night of December 15th, Buch sits in the log cabin and updates his daily report. German activity across the river remains high. Vehicle movement, voices, possible indication of offensive preparations. He sends the report and receives no reply. At 05:30 on December 16th, the forest will explode, and everything these boys think they know about war will be proven catastrophically wrong. December 13th, 1944. A reconnaissance aircraft of the 67th Tactical Reconnaissance Group crosses the German border at 15,000 feet. Cameras clicking every 3 seconds as the pilot maintains steady altitude and heading. Below, the winter forest spreads in monotonous repetition, trees and snow and occasional villages. The photo interpreter who examines the film 2 hours later almost misses it. Fresh tank tracks in the snow, dozens of them, leading from the town of Prüm toward the Belgian border. He makes a note on his analysis sheet, marks the location on a map, estimates 2 to 3 tank battalions based on track patterns. The report goes into the daily intelligence summary with a notation about unusual activity. It reaches V Corps headquarters that evening. An operations officer reads it, considers whether to wake his superior, decides the information can wait until morning. In the morning, it is one report among hundreds, drowning in the daily flood of information that modern armies generate. The tank tracks at Prüm become a footnote, a curiosity, a data point that fits no pattern anyone is watching for. 3 days later, those tanks will lead the assault that tears through American lines. But on December 13th, they are just interesting, not urgent. And in the difference between those 2 words lies catastrophe. The intelligence failure that precedes the Battle of the Bulge is not a single missed signal, but a symphony of ignored warnings, each element clear enough in isolation, collectively screaming a truth that no one wants to hear. Between December 13th and December 15th, 14 separate pieces of evidence point toward massive German offensive preparations opposite the 99th Infantry Division sector. Photo reconnaissance reveals the tank tracks at Prüm. Radio intercepts detect unusual Wehrmacht traffic on frequencies normally silent. Prisoner interrogations, when prisoners can be captured, speak of new units moving into line, of officers distributing ammunition beyond normal defensive requirements, of rumors sweeping German forward positions about a great offensive. Civilian reports from Belgian resistance members describe columns of vehicles moving at night, headlights off, hundreds of trucks and tanks flowing west under cover of darkness. Belgian farmers hear the sound of armor massing in the forests across the Our River. Every report is filed, every warning is noted, and every single one is dismissed or downgraded or lost in the bureaucratic machinery that turns information into intelligence. Colonel Andrew Reeves commands the intelligence section of V Corps, the headquarters responsible for the Ardennes sector. He is a career officer, 43 years old, a veteran of intelligence work in North Africa and Italy. By December 14th, Reeves has reviewed enough reports to feel genuine alarm. The pattern is there for anyone willing to see it. Increased German radio traffic, troop movements, fresh divisions identified through prisoner interrogations, artillery positioning, all the indicators of offensive preparation. On the afternoon of December 14th, Reeves drafts a warning for 1st Army headquarters. The language is careful, professional, balanced. Recent intelligence indicators suggest enemy offensive preparations in the Ardennes sector. Recommend increased reconnaissance and alert status for forward units. The warning goes to 1st Army, and from there to Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, to General Eisenhower's intelligence staff. It arrives on the desk of officers who have their own intelligence, their own assessments, their own certainties about German capabilities. The assessment from Schaff, distributed on December 12th and still considered current, states clearly, the enemy is incapable of major offensive operations in the West. Reeves's warning contradicts this assessment. In the hierarchy of military intelligence, Schaff outranks V Corps. The warning is acknowledged and filed. No changes are made to alert status. No additional reconnaissance is ordered. Andrew Reeves spends the rest of his life wondering what he could have done differently. The prisoner interrogations are perhaps the most explicit warnings and the most thoroughly ignored. On December 14th, 2 German soldiers from the 12th Volksgrenadier Division are captured during a patrol clash near the Losheim Gap. They are young, frightened, and talkative, the kind of prisoners interrogators love because they answer questions without hesitation. They describe their division massing for attack, speak of officers promising a great offensive that will throw the Americans back to the sea, mention seeing panzer units moving up behind the infantry. The interrogation report is filed as reliable information from credible sources. It reaches regiment, division, and corps headquarters within 6 hours. At each level, officers read it and make the same calculation. These are low-ranking soldiers. They cannot know the full picture. They are probably repeating rumors or propaganda fed to them by their own officers. The information is noted but not acted upon. What the officers cannot imagine is that sometimes the lowest-ranking soldiers know the truth precisely because they are not important enough to be deceived, because they see the tanks moving into position with their own eyes, because they hear their sergeants preparing ammunition with their own ears. The German prisoners are sent to rear area camps. Their warning dies in a filing cabinet while the divisions they spoke of prepare to attack. Radio intercepts provide another layer of evidence. Technical confirmation of what human sources are reporting. The Allies have broken many German military codes, can read Wehrmacht communications with varying degrees of success. In early December, signals intelligence detects an increase in radio traffic in the Ardennes sector, units communicating on frequencies that have been silent for months. The traffic is encrypted, resistant to immediate decryption, but the volume alone is significant. Quiet sectors stay quiet on the radio. Active sectors generate traffic. On December 15th, at approximately 1800 hours, intercept stations detect a sudden spike in German radio activity. Units that had maintained radio silence suddenly broadcasting extensively. This pattern is textbook preparation for offensive operations, the final coordination before attack. Radio silence is broken when units need to synchronize watches, confirm attack positions, verify that all elements are ready. The The intercept report notes this unusual activity and forwards it through proper channels. It reaches Allied intelligence headquarters in Paris that evening. An analyst reads it and makes a fateful assessment. The increased radio traffic, he concludes, is probably related to defensive preparations against expected Allied offensives. The possibility that it might indicate German offensive preparations is considered and rejected. After all, the intelligence assessment says Germans are incapable of such operations. The radio intercepts must mean something else. Weather plays its own role in the intelligence failure. Early December brings heavy cloud cover to the Ardennes, thick overcast that grounds reconnaissance aircraft for days at a time. The aerial photography that might reveal German buildup cannot be obtained. When breaks in the weather allow flights, the forests themselves hide what is happening below. Tanks can be concealed under trees. Troops can move only at night. Supply dumps can be camouflaged. The Germans have become experts at deception, learned through years of operating under Allied air superiority. They know American reconnaissance patterns, know when flights are likely, know how to position forces to minimize detection. And so, the photographs that are obtained show surprisingly little. A few tank tracks here, some trucks there, nothing that suggests the massive concentration of force actually present. Analysts compare photos from different dates, looking for changes, and see only what appears to be normal defensive activity. No one considers that the lack of visible activity might itself be a warning, that the Germans might be hiding something too large to hide unless extraordinary measures are taken. The weather, random and uncaring, becomes an accomplice to deception. Captain Charles MacDonald, commanding a rifle company in the 23rd Infantry Regiment temporarily attached to the 99th sector, keeps a diary that will become one of the few first-hand accounts of the intelligence failure from ground level. On December 13th, he writes, "Something is wrong here. Too many signs we are being watched. Too much activity across the river at night. Have reported this multiple times with no response." On December 14th, interrogated a German prisoner today who claims big attack coming soon. Everyone at battalion says he is exaggerating. I think he is telling the truth. On December 15th, last night heard tanks across the river, many of them, reported it. Was told I am hearing things. Morale is good, but I have bad feeling we are missing something important. MacDonald's diary entries reveal the frustration of junior officers who can see trouble coming but cannot make senior commanders believe them. The problem is not lack of information. The problem is certainty, the conviction at higher headquarters that they know what the Germans can and cannot do, that their assessments are correct, because they are based on rigorous analysis and confirmed by multiple sources. What if all those sources are wrong? The question is never seriously asked. The final warning comes on December 15th and is perhaps the most tragically ignored. A German artillery officer, a first lieutenant, deserts his unit and crosses to American lines near Monschau, just north of the 99th sector. He requests immediate interrogation, claims to have urgent information. The interrogator, a lieutenant from V Corps Intelligence, sits down with him at 1400 hours. The German officer speaks excellent English and provides detailed, specific information. His artillery regiment, he explains, has been moved into position for a major offensive. The attack will come on December 16th at 0530, preceded by massive artillery barrage. The objective is to break through American lines and drive to the Meuse River. 3 German armies are involved. The forces opposite the 99th Infantry Division include elements of 6th Panzer Army, the strongest formation in the Wehrmacht. The interrogator writes frantically, filling page after page with the German officer's information. The report is marked urgent, critical intelligence, and forwarded immediately to V Corps headquarters. It arrives at 1600 hours on December 15th. An intelligence officer reads it, notes the extreme specificity, and makes a decision that will haunt him. The German officer, he concludes, is a plant, sent to spread disinformation, designed to panic American commanders. The report is filed with a notation, suspected enemy deception operation. Information unreliable. No alert is issued. No warnings are sent to forward units. 13 hours later, at 0530 on December 16th, the artillery barrage begins exactly as the German deserter described. In the forest around Lanzerath, Lieutenant Buch's platoon spends the evening of December 15th in their log cabin, playing cards and trying to stay warm. Buch has written his daily intelligence report, noting once again the unusual activity across the river, the sounds of vehicles and equipment, the sense that something is building. He receives no response, which is normal now. At 2200 hours, he posts the night watch and tries to sleep. Outside, the temperature drops to 28 degrees Fahrenheit. Snow begins to fall, thick flakes that muffle sound. In the darkness across the Our River, 200,000 German soldiers move into final assault positions. They have been ordered to maintain absolute silence. No smoking, no talking, no equipment noise. They check their weapons one last time, synchronize watches, wait for the order to advance. Among them are veterans of the Eastern Front, hardened by years of combat against the Soviet army, men who have survived Stalingrad and Kursk and the endless retreat through Ukraine. They have been promised that this offensive will change the war, that breaking through to the Meuse will force the Allies to negotiate, that Germany can still win. Most do not believe it, but orders are orders, and dawn is coming. At 0528 on December 16th, German artillery commanders received the firing order. At 0530, 1,600 guns open fire simultaneously along an 80-mile front. The largest German artillery barrage on the Western Front since 1918 crashes into American positions. The Battle of the Bulge begins. Every intelligence warning has been ignored. Every indicator has been dismissed. 14,000 American soldiers of the 99th Infantry Division, most of them teenagers, most who have never fired a shot in combat, are about to face the full fury of a German offensive that their commanders insist cannot happen. In the difference between what intelligence said and what reality delivers, men will die by the hundreds. Some of them will hold positions that should be indefensible. Some of them will change the outcome of the entire offensive without ever knowing it. And all of them, every survivor, will spend the rest of their lives trying to understand how the warnings were so clear and yet so thoroughly ignored. December the 16th, 1944, 0528. The Ardennes forest holds its breath. 28 degrees Fahrenheit. Heavy fog reduces visibility to less than 100 yards. Snow from the night before coats everything in white, muffling sound, creating an eerie silence that soldiers of the 99th Infantry Division will remember for the rest of their lives as the last moment of innocence. In foxholes and bunkers stretched across 20 miles of front, American soldiers pulled their third or fourth hour of guard duty, stamping feet against the cold, checking watches, counting minutes until relief. Most are teenagers. Most joined the Army less than 2 years ago. Most have never heard a shot fired in anger. In scattered command posts, officers review the day's patrol schedules over coffee made from melted snow. The routine is comforting. December 16th will be, they assume, like December 15th and 14th before it. Quiet sector. No significant enemy activity. Another day of cold and boredom. At 0530, this assumption will detonate with the force of 50,000 artillery shells, and the youngest division in the United States Army will learn what war actually means. The barrage arrives with no warning, 1,600 German guns firing simultaneously along an 80-mile front from Monschau to Echternach. The sound is beyond description, beyond anything these soldiers have imagined. The earth itself seems to scream. Trees explode into splinters, foxholes collapse. The air fills with dirt and snow and shrapnel and the endless howling shriek of incoming shells. In the first 90 seconds, 127 American soldiers die, simply cease to exist, vaporized by direct hits or torn apart by shrapnel or crushed when their positions cave in. 340 more are wounded in the first hour, lying in the snow, screaming for medics who cannot reach them through the barrage. The 99th sector receives the heaviest concentration of fire, approximately 20 guns per mile, the kind of artillery density not seen on the Western Front since the great battles of 1918. The Germans have registered their guns during weeks of careful preparation, know exactly where American positions are, can walk their fire across defensive lines with methodical precision. The barrage is designed not just to kill, but to paralyze, to shatter communications, to destroy the ability to coordinate defense, to create chaos that assault troops can exploit. Sergeant William Slape, 24 years old, veteran of 2 years in the Army and 0 minutes of combat, is pulling guard duty in a foxhole 2 miles north of Lanzerath when the barrage begins. He has time to register the sound, to begin turning toward it, before a 105mm shell lands directly on his position. He becomes the 99th Infantry Division's first combat fatality, killed instantly, his body never recovered. The men in foxholes nearby, deafened by the explosion, do not even know he is dead until the barrage lifts and they can check positions. Slape's death is random, meaningless in military terms. A single casualty among thousands, but it represents a transformation. The 99th is no longer a training division. They are combat soldiers now, whether they want to be or not, because people are trying to kill them and succeeding. All across the division's front, soldiers press themselves into the bottom of foxholes, hands over helmets, praying in ways they have not prayed since childhood. Some vomit from fear and the concussive force of nearby explosions. Some lose control of bladder or bowels, shame mixing with terror. Some curl into fetal positions and rock back and forth, making sounds that are not quite screams. And some, the ones who will become leaders and heroes and casualties, force themselves to assess the situation, to count seconds between explosions, to estimate where the fire is coming from, to prepare for what comes after the barrage lifts. At 0600, exactly 30 minutes after it begins, the artillery barrage shifts. The guns lengthen their range, walking the explosions west, falling now on rear areas and supply routes and command posts, clearing the way for what comes next. In the sudden relative quiet, soldiers raise their heads cautiously and see a sight from nightmares. German searchlights positioned miles behind the front flash on, their beams bouncing off the low clouds, creating artificial daylight that illuminates the snow-covered landscape. The effect is ghostly, surreal, a battlefield lit by reflected light that casts no shadows, that makes distance impossible to judge. And in that unnatural illumination, the assault troops appear. Fallschirmjäger paratroopers, elite German infantry, advancing in battalion strength through the forest. They move in extended lines, weapons ready, taking advantage of every bit of cover. There are hundreds of them, thousands, more men than any American soldier has ever seen in one place. The 99th's defensive positions, spread too thin across too much front, suddenly seem impossibly inadequate. Officers grab field telephones to call for artillery support and discover the lines are cut, severed by the barrage. Radio operators try to call regiment and get only static, the signals jammed or the equipment damaged. Each company, each platoon, each squad is alone now, isolated, forced to make decisions without orders or coordination or help. At Lanzerath, Lieutenant Bauch and his 18 men wake to the barrage already in progress. Shells falling in the forest around their log cabin command post. Bauch's first coherent thought is that this cannot be real, that the sound is too immense, that surely this must be some kind of mistake or friendly fire or nightmare. Then a shell hits 50 yards from the cabin, the blast shattering windows, and reality asserts itself with brutal clarity. They are under attack. The quiet sector is not quiet. Everything they have been told is wrong. Buck orders his men to their defensive positions, a series of foxholes positioned to cover the Lanzerath crossroads. They run through exploding shells, diving into positions as shrapnel whines overhead. Private First Class William James lands in his foxhole and immediately vomits, fear overwhelming his system. Sergeant Bill Slape, no relation to the man who died 2 miles north, crawls into position and discovers his hands are shaking so badly he cannot load his rifle. These are the symptoms of men under fire for the first time, bodies rebelling against a threat no training can fully prepare them for. Book moves among the positions, forcing himself to project calm he does not feel, checking that everyone is in place, that weapons are ready, that someone is watching the approaches. He can see nothing through the fog and artificial light. He does not know where the Germans are. He does not know if help is coming. All he knows is that his 18 men must hold this crossroads because orders say so, because someone somewhere decided it matters. The assault hits the 99th's line at 06:15, German infantry emerging from the fog like ghosts. The first contact happens almost simultaneously along the entire front, suggesting coordination and planning that American intelligence insisted the Germans could not achieve. At Hofen in the north, the 393rd Infantry Regiment opens fire on advancing troops of the 3rd Fallschirmjäger Division. At Krinkelt-Rocherath in the center, the 395th engages elements of the 12th SS Panzer Division. At Lanzerath in the south, Buch's platoon watches 500 German soldiers approach their position in company columns, moving with the confidence of men who expect minimal resistance. The Americans hold their fire, following Buch's whispered order, letting the Germans close to 100 yards, then 50, then 25. At 25 yards, Buch screams, "Fire!" and 18 rifles and 4 Browning automatic rifles and 2 .30 caliber machine guns open up simultaneously. The effect is devastating. The leading German company disintegrates, men falling in windows, the advance stalling as survivors dive for cover. But there are hundreds more behind them, and they keep coming. Communication breakdown is the invisible casualty of the opening barrage. Across the 99th's front, telephone lines lie severed, radio nets are jammed or damaged, and commanders lose contact with their units. General Lauer at division headquarters knows the barrage has hit his positions, but has no clear picture of what is happening. Reports trickle in, fragmentary and contradictory. Heavy contact at multiple points. German infantry and company strength. Possible armor. Casualties unknown. Requests for artillery support cannot be filled because forward observers have lost communication with gun batteries. Air support is impossible due to weather. Each unit is fighting its own isolated battle with no sense of the larger picture. This is chaos, the fog of war made literal by weather and smoke and the breakdown of systems that modern armies depend on. Officers trained to command with information must make decisions in ignorance. Do they hold positions or fall back? Do they commit reserves or conserve them? Without knowing what is happening 500 yards away, every decision is a guess. And in war, wrong guesses kill people. By 0700, 90 minutes after the barrage began, the situation has clarified into a nightmare. The entire 99th Infantry Division front is under assault by forces that vastly outnumber them. The 394th Regiment alone is facing the 3rd Fallschirmjäger Division, 12,000 German paratroopers against 3,000 American soldiers. The math is impossible. The positions cannot hold, but orders say hold, so they hold. Foxholes become small universes of violence. Soldiers fire until their barrels glow red. They throw grenades until their arms ache. They fix bayonets and prepare for close combat because ammunition is running low. Men who have never hurt anyone in their lives discover capacities for violence they did not know they possessed. The Germans keep coming, wave after wave, taking casualties that would shatter most units but pressing forward because their orders also say attack. Because the timetable requires breaking through American lines by 0800, because the entire offensive depends on speed. And slowly, inevitably, American positions begin to fall. Not from cowardice or poor fighting, but from simple mathematics. 18 men cannot hold against 500. 3,000 cannot stop 12,000. The 99th is being overwhelmed by force that should have crushed them in minutes. The miracle is that they have not been crushed. That 90 minutes into the largest German offensive on the Western Front, American positions still exist, still return fire, still impose costs on the attackers. At Lanzerath, Buch's platoon has repelled the first German assault and is preparing for the second. They have discovered something important. The German infantry, despite their numbers, are cautious, made hesitant by unexpected resistance. They have been told the Americans here are green troops who will break at first contact. The fierce defense from Lanzerath contradicts that intelligence. So, the Germans pull back, regroup, call forward their heavy weapons. This takes time. Minutes become hours, and hours are what the 99th is buying with blood. Hours that will matter more than anyone realizes, hours that are already disrupting German timetables, creating delays that will cascade through the entire offensive. At 0900, the situation reports reaching V Corps headquarters begin to paint a picture that should be impossible. Green Division under massive attack, enemy forces in regiment and division strength, American positions still holding. The operations officers read these reports with disbelief. How are they holding? Why have they not collapsed? The answer is complex, involving terrain and training, and the sheer stubborn courage of teenagers who refuse to run because they do not know running is an option. But the simplest answer is this. The 99th Infantry Division, dismissed as battle babies, underestimated by both sides, is fighting like it has something to prove. And in the frozen forests of the Ardennes, with artillery screaming overhead and German soldiers dying in their fields of fire, they are proving it. December the 16th, 1944, 0830. The log cabin at Lanzerath Crossroads sits in the center of what has become a killing ground. Bodies in German field gray uniforms lie scattered across the snow, 20 or 30 men who will never move again. Casualties of the first assault that Lieutenant Lyle Buch's 18-man platoon repelled 45 minutes ago. The survivors have pulled back into the tree line 200 yards east, regrouping, calling forward reinforcements, preparing for a second attempt. Inside the American positions, the men of the intelligence and reconnaissance platoon perform the desperate arithmetic of sustained defense. They count remaining ammunition. They check weapons that have already fired more rounds than in all their training combined. They treat the minor wounds that every man seems to have accumulated, shrapnel cuts and splinter punctures that bleed but do not incapacitate. Private First Class William James, the German speaker, listens to voices carrying across the snow and translates fragments for Buch, officers giving orders. Men being positioned for another assault, references to heavy weapons being brought forward. The Germans are not giving up. They cannot afford to. This crossroads controls access to roads their tanks need. And so, they will try again, with more men, more firepower, more determination. 18 Americans will try to stop them. The odds make no sense. The mathematics guarantee failure. But failure is not an option because there is nowhere to run and no one to relieve them. The second German assault comes at 0100, this time in greater strength and with supporting fire from machine guns positioned in the tree line. The German company commander has learned from the first attempt. No more approach columns. His men advance in dispersed formation, using terrain for cover, moving in rushes timed to minimize exposure. It is professional, textbook infantry tactics. Against a properly sized defensive force with adequate support, it might work. Against Buch's platoon, it becomes a test of marksmanship and nerve. The American positions are perfectly sited to create interlocking fields of fire, every approach covered by multiple weapons. As the Germans advance, they move into a crossfire that cuts them apart. Private Risto Milosevic, operating one of the 30 caliber machine guns, fires in disciplined bursts, 5 to 7 rounds, shifting targets, never allowing his barrel to overheat. He is 19 years old and has never shot at a human being before this morning. Now he is killing men with industrial efficiency, watching them fall, forcing himself not to think about what he is doing. Next to him, Private Louis K. Leal loads ammunition belts and counts bodies. 15 down, 20, 25. The German attack stalls as men go to ground, pinned by fire they cannot locate precisely, unable to advance without being killed. The German company commander faces an impossible situation. He has orders to take Lanzerath by 0800. It is now 01030, and his company has suffered 30% casualties without even reaching the American positions. He calls for artillery support and is told the guns are engaged elsewhere, that the schedule cannot accommodate his request. He calls for armor support and learns the tanks are stuck in traffic jams on the roads leading forward, that the American defense has delayed the entire advance, that he must take his objective with what he has. So he reorganizes his remaining men, approximately 120 soldiers, and prepares for a third assault. This time, he splits his force, sending one platoon around the American left flank while the main body attacks frontally. It is a sound tactical decision. The American position cannot cover all approaches with only 18 men. Something must give, but Buch has positioned his squad leaders with authority to make decisions, and Sergeant Bill Slape sees the flanking movement developing. He shifts 2 men with Browning automatic rifles to meet it, creating a new firing position that catches the Germans in enfilade as they move through a draw. The flanking attack collapses in minutes. The frontal assault, robbed of surprise, meets the same disciplined fire that destroyed the previous attempts. By 1100, the German company has effectively ceased to exist as a combat unit. The survivors retreat in disorder, leaving behind 68 dead and wounded, 3 assaults in 2.5 hours, 3 defeats. Inside the American positions, the cost of this victory is becoming apparent. Every man is wounded in some way, most superficially, but some seriously. Private First Class James has shrapnel in his shoulder and cannot raise his rifle above chest height. Corporal Sam Jenkins has taken a bullet through his left hand that has shattered 2 fingers. Sergeant Slape is bleeding from a head wound that he insists is minor, but that leaves him dizzy and nauseous. Ammunition is the critical concern. The machine guns have expended 70% of their belts. The rifles are down to 2 or 3 magazines per man. The Browning automatic rifles are nearly empty. Boak radios battalion headquarters, requesting resupply and reinforcement. The radio operator connects him to a harassed lieutenant who explains that every unit is engaged, that no reinforcements are available, that resupply cannot be attempted until the situation stabilizes. Buch asks when that might be. The lieutenant has no answer. The platoon is alone, has always been alone, will remain alone for the foreseeable future. They must hold with what they have or not hold at all. At 1300, 5 hours into the battle, the nature of the German assault changes. A different officer arrives at the tree line, a major from the 1st SS Panzer Division, Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler, sent forward to discover why a single crossroads is tying up an entire regiment. He surveys the battlefield through binoculars, counts the American positions, estimates their strength at perhaps 2 squads, 40 men maximum. He cannot imagine that 18 men could inflict the casualties his binoculars show scattered in the snow. But the math suggests something impossible is happening here, and impossibilities make him cautious. He calls forward a half-track mounting a 75mm gun, intending to destroy the American positions with direct fire. The half-track rumbles into view at 1330, and for the first time, Buch feels genuine despair. His men have rifles and machine guns. They have no anti-tank weapons. Against armor, they are helpless. The half-track positions itself 400 yards from the American line and begins firing high-explosive rounds methodically into their positions. The log cabin command post takes a direct hit and collapses in flames. A foxhole receives a direct hit and ceases to exist, along with the 2 men inside. The platoon's defensive position is being systematically destroyed, and there is nothing they can do about it. Private Risto Milosevic decides to do something about it. He has a rifle grenade launcher, a device that fits over the muzzle of his M1 Garand and can fire a small shape charge grenade approximately 200 yards. Against a half-track at 400 yards, it is useless. But Milosevic is 19 and terrified and angry at watching his friends die, and anger makes men do irrational things. He crawls out of his position, works his way forward through snow and shell craters, gets within 150 yards of the half-track. He loads the rifle grenade, aims for the thinnest armor he can see, the side panel near the engine, and fires. The grenade arcs through the air and strikes exactly where he aimed. The shape charge detonates, punching through armor, igniting something inside the vehicle. The half-track shudders, smoke pours from hatches, the crew bails out. Milosevic has just knocked out an armored vehicle with a weapon designed for destroying bunkers. The German major watches this happen and revises his estimate of what he is facing. These are not ordinary soldiers. These are fanatics or heroes, or the exceptionally well-trained, and none of those are easy to kill. He pulls his forces back again and calls for reinforcements and heavy artillery. The American position will be reduced by firepower since infantry assaults have failed. This decision buys Buch's platoon another 2 hours. At 1600, as winter darkness begins to fall, The situation at Lanzerath has reached a crisis point. The platoon has held for 10.5 hours against attacks by forces estimated at battalion strength. They have inflicted casualties that will later be calculated as between 400 and 500 Germans killed or wounded, numbers that seem impossible for 18 men. But they are out of ammunition, out of time, out of everything except stubbornness. The machine guns are empty. The rifles are down to a few rounds each. 4 men are seriously wounded and unable to fight. 2 are dead. Buck makes a decision that will haunt him for the rest of his life. He orders his men to surrender. There is no shame in this. They have held far beyond any reasonable expectation. They have disrupted German timetables by an entire day. The 1st SS Panzer Division, which should have been 10 miles west by now, is still stuck behind Lanzerath, unable to advance until the crossroads is secured. Buch's 18 men have accomplished the mission and more. But surrender does not come easy to soldiers who have fought this hard. Some of the men refuse initially, insisting they can hold longer, that reinforcements must be coming. Buck has to make it an order. At 16:30, they raise a white cloth on a rifle and stand with hands raised. The Germans who enter the American positions find what looks like the aftermath of a regimental defense. Expended shell casings lie in drifts. Foxholes show evidence of hours of continuous fire. The bodies outside number into the hundreds. A German lieutenant counts the American prisoners and keeps recounting because the number makes no sense. 18 men. 18. His company lost 70 men attacking this position. The regiment lost hundreds. The entire advance has been delayed by 18 American soldiers. He looks at Buch and speaks in English. "How many men did you have here?" Buch tells him. The lieutenant does not believe it, thinks he is lying to protect units that escaped. He orders a search of the area and finds evidence of only the 18 positions. Slowly, the truth settles over the German officers. They have been held up for an entire day by a platoon. Their casualties were inflicted by teenagers. The timetable for the entire offensive has been disrupted because 18 men refused to run. The lieutenant looks at Buck with something approaching respect and something very close to anger. In German military culture, such a defense would earn medals and commendations. In the chaos of this battle, it has earned only delay and death. The prisoners are marched east toward German lines, hands on heads, moving through formations still deploying for attack. The men of Buck's platoon see for the first time the scale of what they were facing. Tanks by the dozens, infantry by the thousands, artillery pieces wheel to wheel. If they had known the size of the force opposing them, they might have run. Ignorance saved them, kept them fighting when flight would have been the rational choice. As they march, German soldiers stop to stare at them, these 18 Americans who held an entire division at bay. Some Germans spit at them. Some nod with professional respect. Some look at them with the confusion of men who cannot reconcile what happened with what should have happened. The prisoners are taken to a collection point where other Americans captured that day are being assembled. Buch sees men from other units of the 99th, hundreds of them, realizes the entire division is under assault. He tries to find an officer to report to explain what his platoon accomplished, but everyone is too busy processing prisoners or dealing with their own disasters. The report never gets filed. The defense of Lanzerath becomes one small action in a day of thousands. No citations are recommended. No commendations are filed. Buch and his men disappear into the prisoner system, will spend the rest of the war in German camps, will come home in 1945 to discover no one knows or cares what they did. 37 years later, in 1981, Lyle Buch will finally receive official recognition for the defense of Lanzerath. The Presidential Unit citation will acknowledge that his platoon's stand delayed the German offensive by 20 crucial hours, that their defense bought time for other American units to establish defensive lines, that 18 men changed the outcome of the Battle of the Bulge in ways that historians are still calculating. But on December 16, 1944, as Buch marches into captivity with his wounded and exhausted men, none of this is known. They are simply prisoners, defeated soldiers, battle babies who prove not to be babies at all. The crossroads they defended will change hands twice more before the battle ends. The bodies of German soldiers they killed will lie in the snow for weeks before burial details find them. The memory of their stand will fade into the chaos of larger battles, bigger names, more famous actions. But for 20 hours on December 16th, 1944, 18 American soldiers held a crossroads against 500 attackers and won a victory that no one will remember for 4 decades. War is full of such ironies, of crucial actions forgotten, of heroes who die unknown. Lanzerath is one small example of a larger truth. The most important battles are sometimes fought by the soldiers history overlooks. December 17th, 1944, 0600. The villages of Krinkelt and Rocherath sit less than a half-mile apart in the Belgian countryside, connected by a single road that runs between them like a hyphen linking 2 words. Under normal circumstances, these are farming communities of no military significance, collections of stone houses and barns where Belgian families have lived for generations. But circumstances stopped being normal 24 hours ago, when the German offensive shattered the quiet of the Ardennes. Now, Krinkelt-Rocherath, the twin villages, have become the most important piece of ground in Belgium, the place where the German 6th Panzer Army must break through or abandon its entire timetable. Defending these villages are elements of the 99th Infantry Division and the 2nd Infantry Division. The latter rushed forward to help stem the breakthrough. Attacking them is the 12th SS Panzer Division Hitler Youth, 20,000 men and 150 tanks, veterans of the Eastern Front, hardened by years of combat that makes the Ardennes seem almost peaceful by comparison. The next 72 hours will determine whether Germany reaches the Meuse River or whether the Allied line holds, and in those 72 hours, the twin villages will be systematically destroyed, reduced to rubble by house-to-house fighting, so intense that survivors will spend decades trying to find words adequate to describe it. The first German probes hit Krinkelt at 0630, infantry advancing cautiously through morning fog, expecting light resistance. What they find instead is a defensive position that has been reinforced overnight. Foxholes dug in frozen ground. Machine gun positions sighted to cover every approach. Anti-tank guns positioned to command the roads. The 99th learned hard lessons on December 16th. They are not surprised anymore. They are not unprepared. When the German infantry enters the edge of town, American fire cuts them down with methodical precision. The attack stalls within minutes. The German company commander pulls back, reports stronger than expected resistance, requests armor support. At 0700, the 1st Panzer C4 tanks rumble into view, turrets traversing, looking for targets. The tank crews have been told this will be easy, that American morale collapsed yesterday, that the defense is finished. The first tank that rounds the corner onto the main street of Krinkelt takes a 57mm anti-tank round through the frontal armor and explodes. The second tank backs up hastily, slews sideways, and is hit in the side by a bazooka team that materializes from a basement window. The third tank retreats without firing a shot. Easy has become impossible, and the Germans begin to understand they are in for a fight. The defense of Krinkelt-Rocherath is not a planned operation, but an improvisation born of desperation. Units from multiple divisions are jumbled together. Command structures are confused. No one is entirely sure who is in charge. But at the squad and platoon level, soldiers know exactly what to do because the tactics are simple. Let the tanks get close. Hit them from the sides or rear where armor is thinnest. Use buildings for cover. Make the Germans pay for every yard. Private Richard Cowan, a bazooka operator from the 99th's 23rd Infantry Regiment, becomes the unlikely hero of the morning. He positions himself in the upper floor of a stone house overlooking the main crossroads. Bazooka resting on the windowsill, loader crouched beside him, with rockets stacked like cordwood. When German tanks enter the intersection, Cowan fires, reloads, fires again, working with the mechanical efficiency of a man performing a factory job. In 4 hours, he destroys 5 tanks. The burning wrecks creating obstacles that block German advance and provide cover for American infantry. He is 22 years old and has been in combat for exactly 1 day. By the time he is finished, he will be recommended for the Medal of Honor and will instead receive the Distinguished Service Cross because witnesses to his actions will be killed before they can provide sworn statements. The fighting in the villages is unlike anything in American military doctrine or training. The open field battles that the Army prepared for, the textbook maneuvers and coordinated attacks, have no application in streets where buildings channel movement and every window might hide an enemy. Combat becomes intimate, personal, fought at ranges measured in yards rather than hundreds of yards. Soldiers fire through walls, knowing German troops are on the other side, but unable to see them. Grenades are thrown around corners. Satchel charges are used to collapse buildings onto German positions. The noise is constant and maddening. Rifle fire and machine guns and tank cannons all creating a cacophony that makes communication impossible, that forces units to fight in isolation, even when friendly forces are one house away. Men go deaf from the concussive force of explosions in confined spaces. They breathe air thick with dust and smoke and the smell of burning that no one wants to identify. Time becomes meaningless. Minutes stretch into hours. Hours compress into moments. Soldiers fight until they run out of ammunition, scavenge from German dead, fight some more. The Germans commit more forces throughout December 17th, feeding battalion after battalion into the meat grinder of the twin villages. They cannot understand why the villages have not fallen. Intelligence said American morale was broken. Intelligence said the 99th was a green division that would collapse under pressure. Instead, they are fighting with a ferocity that suggests veterans, not teenagers. At 1400, a battalion of Panther tanks attempts to force the issue, advancing in column down the main road connecting the villages. American defenders have prepared for exactly this scenario. They have placed mines in the road, covered them with snow, positioned anti-tank guns and enfilade. The first Panther hits a mine and throws a track. The second tank crashes into the first. The third attempts to back up and is hit by anti-tank fire. In 15 minutes, the battalion loses 12 tanks and achieves nothing. The German regimental commander, watching through binoculars from a hill east of the villages, cannot believe what he is seeing. His elite Panzer division is being destroyed by a defense that should not exist. December 18th brings a new German tactic. Overwhelming force applied simultaneously across the entire defensive perimeter. If the Americans can concentrate fire to defeat piecemeal attacks, then the solution is to attack everywhere at once, to create more threats than the defenders can handle. At 0600, 6 separate German assault groups hit Krinkelt-Rocheroth from different directions, each composed of infantry supported by armor, each with orders to break through regardless of cost. The American defense begins to crack under this pressure. Individual positions are overrun. Entire squads are cut off and forced to surrender or die. By 0900, Germans have penetrated into the center of Rocheroth, are fighting in the same streets and houses that Americans held yesterday. The defense becomes a delaying action, each house held as long as possible before falling back to the next house, trading space for time, making the Germans pay in blood for every room. Private First Class William Soderman, armed with a bazooka, moves from building to building, destroying tanks from impossibly close range, sometimes firing from basements as tanks roll overhead. He will destroy 6 tanks before a German bullet wounds him severely enough to take him out of the fight. Like Cowan, his actions will earn a Medal of Honor recommendation that will be downgraded due to the chaos of record-keeping during the battle. The defenders know they cannot hold indefinitely. The mathematics are impossible. The Germans have unlimited reinforcements. The Americans are fighting with what they have, and every casualty weakens the line. On the afternoon of December 18th, division commanders make the decision to withdraw. The twin villages will be abandoned, but not before inflicting maximum damage on German forces, not before buying maximum time for other American units to establish defensive lines further west. The withdrawal is scheduled for December 19th, after dark, a phased operation that will pull units out by company while maintaining a defensive screen. Until then, they must hold. 72 hours of continuous combat have pushed men beyond normal limits of endurance. They are fighting on adrenaline and fear and the stubborn refusal to let their friends die for nothing. Some men have not slept in 3 days. Some have not eaten. All are wounded in ways large or small. The casual ranks to the 99th, a lone number 739, killed, 2,400 wounded or missing. The 2nd Division's casualties are comparable, but they are still fighting, still making the Germans pay. The final day in Krinkelrath, December 19th, becomes an exercise in controlled chaos. Units withdraw in sequence, each covering the withdrawal of the next. A leapfrog retreat that requires coordination and discipline under fire. The Germans sense the withdrawal and attack with renewed fury, trying to turn the retreat into a rout. American rearguards hold key positions to the last possible moment, then sprint for the next defensive line, under covering fire from units already in position. Buildings are destroyed as troops evacuate them, denying cover to pursuing Germans. Streets are mined. Entire blocks are set ablaze. By 1400 hours, the last American soldiers cross west out of the twin villages, and the 99th's position in Krinkelrath comes to an end. The villages themselves are unrecognizable, 80% of structures destroyed or damaged, rubble clogging streets, German and American bodies lying where they fell because neither side has had time to recover them. The Germans have captured the twin villages, but the cost has been catastrophic. The withdrawal takes American forces to Elsenborn Ridge, a defensive line that runs for 6 miles along high ground west of the villages. Here, engineers have been working day and night to prepare positions, digging trenches in frozen earth, stringing barbed wire, positioning artillery to create interlocking fields of fire. The remnants of the 99th and 2nd Divisions file into these positions and collapse from exhaustion. Some men fall asleep where they stop walking, unable to take another step. Medics move among them, trying to triage who needs immediate treatment and who can wait. The walking wounded outnumber the aid station's capacity to treat them. Officers compile casualty lists and discover entire platoons have ceased to exist, that companies have been reduced to squad strength, that the divisions are combat effective only in the loosest sense of that term. But they have accomplished the mission. The twin villages bought 3 days, 3 days during which the German 6th Panzer Army should have reached the Meuse River, but instead became bogged down in house-to-house fighting that destroyed its timetable and consumed its strength. The generals will analyze this battle for years, trying to understand how green divisions stopped veteran panzer armies. The answer is visible in the smoking ruins of Krinkelrath, in the burned-out tanks littering the streets, in the bodies of German soldiers who learned too late that American soldiers fight hardest when defending ground their commanders say they cannot hold. On December 20th, German forces attempt to follow up their capture of the twin villages with an assault on Elsenborn Ridge. They advance with the confidence of troops who have won a victory, who believe momentum is on their side. The artillery barrage that meets them is unlike anything they have experienced in the West. 144 American guns fire simultaneously, turning the approach to Elsenborn Ridge into a killing field. The German assault collapses before it reaches American lines. A second attempt that afternoon meets the same result. A third attempt, on December 21st, achieves nothing but more casualties. The German regimental commander finally admits what his soldiers already know. Elsenborn Ridge will not fall. The northern shoulder of the offensive has been stopped. The 6th Panzer Army, which was supposed to be in Brussels by now, is stuck east of Elsenborn, unable to advance. Losing strength every day, it remains committed to useless attacks. On December 22nd, new orders arrive. Abandon attempts on Elsenborn. Shift all remaining forces south to support the attacks toward Bastogne. The twin villages have served their purpose. They delayed the Germans long enough for the defense to solidify. The battle babies, the division everyone expected to break, have held the line where veteran divisions might have faltered. They held because they did not know holding was supposed to be impossible, because no one told them they could quit, because teenagers sometimes fight with a ferocity that age and experience cannot match. The twin villages are lost, but the battle is won. And in that paradox lies the truth of December 1944 in the Ardennes. December 19th, 1944. The Führer's headquarters, Wolfslayer, East Prussia. SS Oberstgruppenführer Sepp Dietrich, commander of the 6th Panzer Army, stands before a map covered with colored pins and acetate overlays, trying to explain to Adolf Hitler why his offensive has not reached the Meuse River. The plan called for breakthrough on December 16th. It is now December 19th, 72 hours behind schedule, and 6th Panzer Army has penetrated barely 10 miles into American lines. The northern route, the main avenue of advance, remains blocked at Elsenborn Ridge. The twin villages of Krinkelt-Rocherath, which should have fallen in hours, consumed 3 days and thousands of casualties. Now, the Americans have established defensive lines on high ground that overlooks every approach, have positioned artillery that makes further attacks suicidal. Dietrich, a veteran of the Eastern Front, a soldier who has seen impossible defenses broken by determined assault, must admit the unthinkable. His army is stopped. Hitler listens in silence, face expressionless, hands clasped behind his back. When Dietrich finishes, Hitler asks a single question. What stopped you? Dietrich has no satisfying answer. American resistance was fiercer than expected. Terrain favored defense. Weather prevented full use of air support. But the real answer, the one he cannot quite articulate, is that intelligence was catastrophically wrong about what forces held the northern shoulder, about what the 99th Infantry Division was capable of achieving. The German battle plan for Operation Autumn Fog, later known as the Battle of the Bulge, depended on speed above all else. The offensive must reach the Meuse River within 3 to 4 days, must capture Allied fuel dumps to sustain the advance, must create such chaos in Allied lines that political negotiations become possible. Every element of this plan assumed that American defenses in the Ardennes would collapse quickly, that the surprise attack would paralyze command structures, that green divisions like the 99th would break under the initial assault. None of these assumptions proved correct. The 99th did not break. They delayed. And delay is death to any offensive that depends on maintaining momentum. By December 19th, the entire German timetable has been destroyed. Units that should be approaching Brussels are still fighting in Belgian border villages. Tank columns that should be exploiting breakthroughs are stuck in traffic jams on roads that were supposed to be cleared days ago. And the reason for all of this can be traced directly to the unexpected resistance at Elsenborn Ridge, to battles that should have been won in hours but consumed days. The traffic jam begins at Lanzerath, the crossroads where Lyle Bauch's 18-man platoon held for 20 hours. The 1st SS Panzer Division, Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler, the tip of 6th Panzer Army's spear, was supposed to pass through Lanzerath by December 16th at 0800, 18 hours before Buch's platoon finally surrendered. That delay forced the entire division onto secondary roads, routes not designed for heavy armor, paths that wind through forests instead of providing direct access to objectives. By the time Lanzerath falls and tanks can move forward, they discover the roads ahead are clogged with other German units that have also been delayed, that are also trying to use the same limited infrastructure to advance. The result is gridlock. On December 20th, aerial reconnaissance photographs show a German traffic jam that stretches for 15 miles, tanks and trucks and artillery pieces all motionless on roads that have become parking lots. Luftwaffe fighters provide some protection from Allied air attack, but they cannot solve the fundamental problem. There are too many vehicles trying to use too few roads, and the Americans who were supposed to be fleeing in panic are instead defending every crossroads, every bridge, every choke point that might delay German advance by another hour. Fuel becomes the crisis that transforms delay into disaster. The German offensive was planned on the assumption that American fuel dumps would be captured intact within 48 hours, providing the petroleum products necessary to sustain the advance. The dumps around Liège, massive stockpiles containing millions of gallons of fuel, were designated as primary objectives for 6th Panzer Army. But 6th Panzer Army never reaches Liège because it cannot get past Elsenborn Ridge. The fuel dumps remain in American hands. Meanwhile, German tanks consume their carried fuel fighting battles that should not have happened, grinding through delays that should not have existed. By December 21st, forward panzer units begin reporting empty fuel tanks. Some tanks are abandoned by their crews, left beside roads because there is no fuel to move them. Others are towed by vehicles that still have fuel, reducing the combat power of units already weakened by casualties. The logistics officers who planned the offensive assumed a 4-day timeline. They provisioned for 4 days. Now, on day 5, with objectives still not achieved, the supply system begins to collapse under demands it was never designed to meet. The ultra-intelligence intercepts tell the story from the German perspective, encrypted messages decoded by Allied cryptographers, providing real-time insight into enemy thinking. On December 21st, British codebreakers at Bletchley Park intercept a message from 6th Panzer Army headquarters to Berlin. The text, once decrypted, is stark. Resistance at Elsenborn unforeseen and insuperable, unable to advance on primary route. Secondary routes inadequate for armored forces. Fuel situation critical. Request permission to shift main effort south. The message reveals that German commanders understand their northern offensive has failed, that Elsenborn Ridge represents an impenetrable barrier, that the entire strategic concept of 6th Panzer Army's advance has collapsed. The intercept is forwarded to General Eisenhower's headquarters within hours, providing confirmation of what battlefield reports have suggested. The German offensive is stalling. The crisis is not over, but the existential threat to Allied armies, the possibility of being cut off and destroyed, is receding, and the reason is visible on every tactical map. The 99th Infantry Division held where German planners assumed they would break. General Dwight D. Eisenhower reviews the situation on December 22nd, studying maps that show German penetrations in the south, but complete failure in the north. His intelligence officers explain what they have pieced together from prisoner interrogations, captured documents, and ultra-intercepts. The German plan required breakthrough on multiple axes. The northern thrust, assigned to 6th Panzer Army, was supposed to be the main effort, the drive that would split Allied forces and create conditions for operational victory. That thrust has been stopped at Elsenborn by the 99th Infantry Division and 2nd Infantry Division. The southern thrust, assigned to 5th Panzer Army, has achieved deeper penetration and is now besieging Bastogne, but it lacks the strength to exploit this success without support from 6th Panzer Army. In military terms, the German offensive has culminated, has reached the point where attacking strength is exhausted and further advance becomes impossible. Eisenhower's operations officer asks if counterattack orders should be prepared. Eisenhower studies the map and makes a decision that will define his leadership. Yes, prepare counterattack orders, but also ensure that whoever commanded the defense at Elsenborn receives recognition. They just saved the entire Allied campaign in the West. The weather breaks on December 23rd, clouds lifting for the first time in a week, allowing Allied air power to enter the battle. Thousands of sorties are flown, fighters and bombers attacking the stalled German columns that have become perfect targets for aerial bombardment. The traffic jams that started at Lanzerath become killing grounds as bombs and rockets turn vehicles into burning wrecks. Fuel trucks explode in chain reactions. Ammunition carriers detonate with enough force to crater roads. The German soldiers who survived the initial assaults, who fought through the twin villages and threw themselves against Elsenborn Ridge, now die in their vehicles, unable to move forward or back, trapped by terrain and logistics, and the collapse of their own offensive's timetable. Allied pilots report that targets are so numerous they must make multiple passes to expend all ordnance. The 9th Air Force flies over 2,000 sorties on December 23rd alone, and the destruction they inflict is not just physical, but psychological. German troops who believed in the offensive, who thought momentum was on their side, watch their formations torn apart from the air, and understand the battle has turned. The strategic implications take days to fully appreciate. If 6th Panzer Army had broken through at Elsenborn on December 16th as planned, if the 99th Infantry Division had collapsed in the first hours as German intelligence predicted, the entire geometry of the battle changes. German armor races west on good roads, reaching Liège by December 18th, capturing fuel dumps, threatening Allied supply lines. The American First Army becomes isolated, unable to retreat, forced to defend on multiple fronts. The British Second Army, positioned north of the breakthrough, faces encirclement. The entire Allied offensive into Germany, scheduled for January, must be abandoned to deal with the crisis. Politically, such a disaster might force negotiations, might create the breathing space Germany needs to shift forces east against the Soviet offensive. This was Hitler's gamble. This was the strategic vision behind Operation Autumn Fog. and it failed because 18 men held a crossroads for 20 hours, because teenagers fought like veterans in the twin villages, because the 99th Infantry Division refused to break when breaking would have been reasonable and understandable and expected. On December 26th, the last German attack against Elsenborn Ridge is repelled with such decisive losses that further attempts are abandoned. The 6th Panzer Army begins shifting forces south, trying to support the attacks on Bastogne, leaving only screening forces opposite the 99th's positions. The battle has moved away from Elsenborn, will continue for another month in the south, but the northern shoulder is secure, immovable, the rock on which German planning shattered. The 99th Infantry Division has been in continuous combat for 10 days, has suffered over 4,000 casualties, has been pushed to the edge of collapse. But they have not collapsed, they have held. And in holding, they have changed the outcome of the largest battle the United States Army fought in World War II. Historians will debate for decades how close Germany came to achieving strategic surprise in the Ardennes. The answer, visible in the traffic jams and fuel shortages and failed attacks at Elsenborn, is that they came very close indeed. But close is not enough in war. Victory requires breaking through, requires maintaining momentum, requires the enemy to behave as you expect. The 99th Infantry Division, the battle babies, the division dismissed by both sides as inexperienced and unreliable, did not behave as expected. They fought, they held, they won. And in winning, they saved an entire army from potential disaster. The pivot point of the Battle of the Bulge is not Bastogne, though Bastogne will receive the glory. The pivot point is Elsenborn Ridge, where the German offensive died against defenses it was supposed to sweep aside in hours. December 20th, 1944. Elsenborn Ridge rises 300 feet above the surrounding Ardennes countryside, a geographic feature that Belgian farmers have known for centuries, but that American military planners barely noticed until 4 days ago. Now, it is the most important piece of ground in Belgium, perhaps in all of Western Europe. The ridge runs for 6 miles, oriented north to south, commanding views of every approach from the east. Engineers have transformed it into a fortress in 72 hours, digging trenches that connect individual foxholes into continuous lines, stringing barbed wire across approaches, positioning anti-tank obstacles at every possible avenue of armor advance, and the artillery. 12 battalions, 192 guns total, positioned on the reverse slope where German observation cannot see them, registered on every road and trail and open field that an attacking force might use. The 99th Infantry Division holds the line, what remains of them after 10 days of combat. They number 9,847 men now, down from 14,000 at the start. The missing are dead, or wounded, or captured, or simply gone, scattered in the chaos of retreat and defense. But those who remain have learned something in the furnace of the twin villages. They have learned they can fight. They have learned they can win. And now, dug into positions on high ground with massive artillery support, they are about to teach the German 6th Panzer Army a lesson in the cost of attacking prepared defenses. The first German probe comes at 0700, a company-strength force of infantry supported by 5 tanks, testing the American lines to find weak points. They advance through morning fog that reduces visibility to less than 50 yards, moving cautiously, expecting resistance but not understanding the scale of what waits on the ridge. At 200 yards from American positions, the fog lifts suddenly, a meteorological accident that exposes the German force in open ground. The artillery observer with the 99th's forward companies sees them and makes a single radio call. Fire mission, coordinates Delta 7, company in the open, mixed infantry and armor. 2 miles behind the ridge, the 372nd Field Artillery Battalion receives the call and responds with a time-on-target barrage, multiple batteries firing simultaneously so all rounds arrive at once. 72 shells, 105 mm high explosive, detonate on the German position within a 5-second window. The company ceases to exist. Survivors, perhaps 20 men out of 150, stumble back toward their lines in shock. The tanks, armor useless against artillery, withdraw at maximum speed. The entire engagement lasts 3 minutes. German commanders watching from observation posts realize they have made a catastrophic miscalculation about American defensive capabilities. Throughout December 20th, German forces make 8 separate attempts to probe Elsenborn Ridge, trying to find a weak point, a gap in coverage, some route that might allow breakthrough. Each attempt meets the same result. American forward observers call for artillery. American guns respond with overwhelming fire. German attacks collapse before reaching the main defensive line. By evening, German casualty estimates exceed 1,000 men without achieving any tactical gain. Officers report to their commanders that Elsenborn is impregnable, that further attacks are suicide, that the entire northern offensive must be abandoned or redirected. The reports are received with disbelief at higher headquarters. How can a ridge held by a defeated American division be impregnable? The 99th was supposed to have been destroyed on December 16th. Intelligence said they were green troops, untested, likely to break. The fact that they are not only intact, but fighting from prepared positions supported by massed artillery, suggests intelligence was wrong about everything. And if intelligence was wrong about the 99th, what else might it be wrong about? December 21st brings the weather that will define the next phase of the battle. The clouds lift completely, revealing blue sky for the first time in 2 weeks. The temperature drops to 5 degrees Fahrenheit, cold enough that weapons malfunction, that exposed skin freezes in minutes, that the ground becomes harder than concrete. American soldiers in their foxholes welcome the clear weather because it means Allied air power can operate, but they curse the cold that makes every hour in defensive positions an exercise in endurance. Frostbite becomes as dangerous as German bullets. Men rotate from foxholes to warming tents every 4 hours, the minimum time before cold injuries become disabling. Feet must be dried and massaged. Hands must be kept moving. Water freezes in canteens. Rations must be thawed before eating. The human cost of holding Elsenborn is not just combat casualties, but the steady attrition of cold injury, men whose feet turn black with frostbite, who must be evacuated to rear areas for treatment, who will never walk properly again. The 99th is being eroded by temperature as much as by enemy action. The largest German assault against Elsenborn comes on December 23rd, a coordinated attack by 3 battalions of infantry, 40 tanks, and supporting artillery. German commanders have decided that if probes will not work, overwhelming force must be applied. The attack begins at 0600 with a 30-minute artillery barrage on American positions, German guns finally being brought forward in sufficient numbers to provide serious fire support. American soldiers hunker in their foxholes as shells scream overhead, exploding along the ridgeline. Some positions take direct hits, some men die. But the barrage is linear, predictable, falling on the front line, while the artillery batteries on the reverse slope remain untouched. When the barrage lifts and German infantry advance, they move into what the artillery observers have been waiting for. The fire mission goes out to all 12 American artillery battalions simultaneously. Fire for effect. Maximum rate. Everything you have. 192 guns respond as one. The impact of massed artillery fire is difficult to convey to anyone who has not experienced it. Imagine a football field. Now, imagine every square yard of that field receiving a 105mm high-explosive shell within 30 seconds. The ground itself seems to erupt, dirt and snow and shrapnel flying in geysers of destruction. Men caught in this barrage do not die so much as disappear, vaporized by overpressure or torn apart by shrapnel, or simply buried under collapsing earth. The German attack formation, 3,000 men in textbook assault lines, disintegrates. Entire platoons are wiped out. Tank crews button up their hatches and try to advance through the barrage, but artillery can destroy tanks, can hit them from above where armor is thinnest, can disable them with near misses that damage tracks or optics. Within 10 minutes, the German assault has lost cohesion. Officers are dead. Communications are severed. Units are isolated. And still the artillery falls, relentless, mechanical, impersonal. American forward observers watch through binoculars and adjust fire, walking the barrage back and forth across the German position, ensuring nothing survives. At 0640, the German regimental commander orders retreat. The survivors stumble back to their start line, leaving behind an estimated 800 dead and 23 destroyed tanks. The defenders watch this slaughter with a mixture of awe and horror. They have done nothing but call for artillery. The guns did all the killing. Private First Class James Sullivan, manning a forward observation post, will later write in a letter home that he felt like a god on December 23rd, that he called down thunder with a radio and watched men die by the hundreds, that the power was intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. This is industrial warfare, combat reduced to mathematics and coordinates, killing divorced from the personal equation of looking your enemy in the eyes. The men pulling lanyards on artillery pieces 2 miles behind the ridge never see the Germans they kill. The forward observers see only distant figures through binoculars. The psychological distance this creates is necessary because the scale of killing would otherwise be unbearable. 800 men dead in 40 minutes. Spoken aloud, the number is almost meaningless. Seen on a battlefield, the reality would break most soldiers. So, the killing is abstracted, made clinical, transformed into radio calls and grid coordinates, and the mechanical process of loading and firing and loading again. Christmas Eve, December 24th, brings another German attempt, this time at night. The planners reason that darkness will negate American artillery advantage, that illumination will be impossible, that infiltration tactics might succeed where frontal assault failed. They are wrong on all counts. At 2200 hours, German infantry begin moving toward American lines in squad-sized elements, maintaining noise discipline, advancing through darkness using only starlight for navigation. American listening posts pick up the sound of movement at 2300 hours and report enemy contact. The forward observer makes a single request: illumination rounds, continuous, grid square, Delta 8. Miles behind the ridge, artillery crews load special shells, projectiles that burst at altitude, and deploy magnesium flares suspended from parachutes. The first rounds go up at 23:05. Suddenly the night becomes day. Artificial light bright enough to read by, shadows stark and black against snow. The German infantry are caught in the open, exposed, their infiltration turned into suicide. Machine guns open fire from prepared positions. Mortars drop rounds on pre-registered coordinates. The Germans try to retreat, but illumination rounds keep coming, one after another, turning night into perpetual twilight. By midnight, the attack has failed, leaving another 200 German dead in the snow. The pattern repeats through December 26th. German attacks, American artillery response, German retreat and casualties. The mathematics are relentless and favor the defender. Each German attack costs hundreds of casualties. Each American defense costs dozens. The 99th is bleeding, but the Germans are hemorrhaging. By December 26th, 6th Panzer Army has lost over 5,000 men trying to take Elsenborn Ridge, has gained 0 yards of ground, has accomplished nothing except proving that the northern offensive is finished. The ridge has become a fortress not through elaborate fortifications, but through the simple geometry of high ground, plus artillery, plus soldiers willing to hold. On December 26th, new orders arrive from German High Command. Abandon attempts on Elsenborn Ridge. Shift all available forces south to support attacks on Bastogne. The northern shoulder of the offensive is conceded. The battle moves away. For the 99th Infantry Division, December 26th marks a transition. They have held for 10 days against everything Germany could throw at them. The casualties have been catastrophic. Since December 16th, the division has suffered 217 killed, 890 wounded during the Elsenborn defense phase alone, on top of earlier casualties from the initial German assault. Total casualties exceed 4,500 men, roughly 1/3 of the division's strength. Companies that should number 200 men operate with 80. Platoons have been reduced to squad strength. Some units exist only on paper, their men dead or wounded or scattered. But they have held. The ridge has not fallen. The German 6th Panzer Army, which was supposed to drive to Brussels and split the Allied armies, has been stopped cold by terrain and artillery, and the stubborn courage of soldiers who refuse to break. Military historians will spend decades analyzing the Battle of the Bulge, debating what factors determined its outcome. They will discuss Bastogne and Patton's relief column and the weather and Allied air superiority. These factors mattered, but the pivot point, the place where German offensive power died, is Elsenborn Ridge, where the battle babies proved they were not babies at all. The psychological cost of 10 days in continuous combat is harder to measure than physical casualties. Men who survive Elsenborn are changed in ways they cannot articulate, will not fully understand for years. They have killed. They have watched friends die. They have experienced fear so intense it produced physical symptoms, vomiting and loss of bowel control and paralysis that required supreme effort to overcome. They have learned that courage is not the absence of fear, but the ability to function despite fear, to do the job even when every instinct screams to run. Some men will carry this knowledge with pride. Some will carry it as trauma. Most will carry it as both. On December 27th, when the German pressure finally eases, soldiers in foxholes allow themselves to believe they might survive. They clean weapons with hands that shake from exhaustion rather than cold. They eat rations without tasting them. They sleep in shifts, never fully relaxing, always half expecting another attack. The officers try to compile casualty lists and discover records are incomplete, that men are listed as wounded who are actually dead, that soldiers thought killed have been found alive in aid stations. The chaos of battle has consumed record-keeping. Months will pass before accurate accounting is completed. On December 28th, the first replacements arrive, fresh troops from training camps in England and France, sent to bring the division back to strength. The veterans watch these replacements with a mixture of pity and resentment. The new men look impossibly young, impossibly clean, impossibly naive. They ask questions about what combat is like, what the Germans fight like, whether it is as bad as they have heard. The veterans do not answer, cannot answer, because the gap between experience and imagination is too wide to bridge with words. How do you explain to someone who has never been shot at what it feels like when bullets crack past your head? How do you describe the smell of a burning tank with crew inside? How do you convey the sound a man makes when shrapnel tears through his abdomen? You cannot. So the veterans say nothing, accept the replacements with resignation, know that some of these fresh-faced boys will be dead within days or weeks, that this is how divisions maintain strength, by feeding new men into the machine that consumes the old. On December 31st, 1944, the 99th Infantry Division holds positions on Elsenborn Ridge, battered but unbroken, victorious but at devastating cost. They have held the line where veteran divisions might have failed. They have done what everyone said was impossible. And now, as the year turns from 44 to 45, they wait for new orders, new battles, new tests. The war is not over. The 99th's combat is not finished. But they have proven something at Elsenborn Ridge that no one can take away. They have proven they can fight. January 1st, 1945. The command post of the 99th Infantry Division sits in a requisitioned Belgian farmhouse 3 miles behind Elsenborn Ridge. Rooms that once housed a family, now converted to military purpose with maps and radios, and officers studying terrain models. Major General Walter Lauer receives his orders from V Corps headquarters at 0800, reads them twice to ensure he understands correctly, then looks at his operations officer with an expression mixing satisfaction and concern. The 99th is being assigned offensive operations. After 16 days of defensive combat, 16 days of being attacked and pushed back and holding against overwhelming force, they are now expected to attack. The objective is to recapture the Monschau corridor, to push German forces back across the border, to restore the front line to where it stood on December 15th. Lauer understands the logic. The German offensive has culminated. Allied forces are preparing counteroffensives all along the Bulge. Every division must contribute. But his division is not ready for offensive operations. They are still absorbing replacements. They are still recovering from casualties. Many soldiers have not slept more than 4 hours in the past 2 weeks. Now they must transition from defense to attack, must reverse the psychological orientation that kept them alive, must become aggressors instead of defenders. The orders allow no flexibility. Attack begins January 13th. Lauer has 12 days to prepare. The psychological shift from defensive to offensive warfare is more difficult than civilians imagine. In defense, the mission is clear. Hold this ground. Do not let the enemy pass. Success is measured by what does not happen, by attacks that are repelled, by lines that do not break. Soldiers in defensive positions can dig in, can use terrain, can create fields of fire that maximize their advantage. They are reacting to enemy action rather than initiating it. Psychologically, this is easier. You are the victim responding to aggression. Your cause is clearly just. You fight to survive, to protect your friends, to deny the enemy what he wants to take. Offensive warfare reverses everything. Now, you must leave your foxhole, must expose yourself to enemy fire, must advance into unknown terrain against positions the enemy has prepared. You become the aggressor. You must take ground the enemy wants to keep. Success requires accepting casualties that defense might avoid. The mental switch required to make this transition is profound. Some soldiers cannot make it. Freeze when ordered to advance. Cower in cover when the mission demands movement. This is not cowardice. It is the normal human response to being asked to walk toward danger rather than away from it. Training for the offensive begins on January 2nd, using ground behind Elsenborn Ridge to rehearse assault tactics. The replacements must learn infantry basics that veteran soldiers already know. How to advance under fire using buddy teams. How to assault a bunker with grenades and automatic weapons. How to clear buildings without being killed by defenders. The veterans must remember these skills, must overcome habits learned in defense. An officer from the 2nd Infantry Division, a unit with months of offensive combat experience, arrives to share lessons. He explains that attacking is about momentum. You cannot stop. Once an assault begins, it must continue until the objective is taken, or the attack is defeated. Stopping allows the enemy to reorganize, to bring up reinforcements, to turn your advance into a death trap. Speed and violence, he says, are the only advantages the attacker has. Use them. Keep moving. Accept casualties. Do not stop. The 99th's officers listen and make notes and try to imagine their soldiers, most of whom joined the army less than 2 years ago, executing these tactics against German positions. January 13th arrives with temperatures at -10 degrees Fahrenheit, cold that makes weapons malfunction, that turns skin numb in seconds, that kills as effectively as bullets. The 99th attacks at 0600, 3 regiments advancing on objectives that include Wallerscheid Crossroads, the same ground where German attacks began on December 16th. The advance is tentative at first, soldiers moving cautiously, expecting resistance that does not immediately materialize. The Germans have pulled back to defensive lines closer to the border, conserving strength, abandoning exposed positions. By noon, the 99th has advanced 3 miles and recaptured Wallerscheid without serious fighting. Officers call this a success. Soldiers know better. The Germans gave up this ground because it was no longer worth defending. The real test will come when American forces reach positions the Germans intend to hold. That test comes on January 15th near the village of Losheim, site of a gap in the Siegfried Line that German forces used for their December breakthrough. Now German troops have reoccupied fortified positions, have mined approaches, have positioned anti-tank guns to cover roads. The 99th's attack hits these defenses at 0700 and immediately bogs down. Machine gun fire from concrete bunkers pins down advancing infantry. Mortar rounds drop on American positions with precision that suggests pre-registered coordinates. Casualties mount. Companies that started the attack with 100 men are down to 70 within an hour. The advance stalls 600 yards from the objective. Battalion commanders call for artillery support and receive fire missions that saturate German positions, but do not destroy the bunkers, which are built to withstand anything except direct hits. At 1400 hours, the attack is suspended to reorganize. The first day of offensive operations ends with minimal gains and 137 casualties. The 99th is learning that attacking is harder than defending. The offensive continues through late January, a grinding advance measured in hundreds of yards per day rather than miles. Villages are recaptured, sometimes finding them empty, sometimes fighting house to house against German rear guards. The 99th passes through territory they defended in December and discovers what happened there: burned vehicles, mass graves dug by German troops for their dead, destroyed equipment, the evidence of battles fought and won and lost. At one crossroads, they find American helmets stacked in a pile, dozens of them, taken from soldiers killed or captured. No one speaks about what this means. On January 28, the 99th crosses into Germany for the first time, a symbolic moment that holds less meaning than expected. Germany looks like Belgium. The same forests, the same snow, the same cold. Only the language on the road signs changes. But psychologically, the crossing matters. They are on enemy territory now. The mission has shifted from defending Allied ground to conquering Axis territory. The casualties in offensive operations exceed the rate from defensive fighting, a statistical reality that shocks officers who track these numbers. Between January 1st and January 30th, the 99th suffers 892 killed or wounded, roughly 90 casualties for every mile gained. In defensive operations during December, the casualty rate was lower because soldiers could use cover, could fight from prepared positions, could inflict losses without exposing themselves. Now, advancing across open ground against prepared defenses, they trade favorable mathematics for unfavorable ones. Each attack requires soldiers to leave cover. Each assault creates opportunities for German defenders to fire on exposed targets. The replacement system struggles to keep pace. Men arrive from training camps, join units, die, or are wounded before learning their squad mates' names. Platoon sergeants stop trying to remember replacement names, calling them all soldier, until they survive long enough to earn individual recognition. This sounds callous, but is psychologically necessary. Forming emotional bonds with men who might be dead tomorrow is a recipe for breakdown. The cold injuries rival combat casualties as a source of attrition. Frostbite cases fill aid stations, men whose feet have frozen inside boots that could not be removed often enough to dry, whose fingers have turned black from extended exposure. The medical evacuation rate for cold injury equals the rate for combat wounds by late January. Doctors amputate toes and fingers to prevent gangrene from spreading. Soldiers who survive combat are crippled by weather. The Army issues cold weather gear, insulated boots, and heavy coats and wool socks. But the supplies are insufficient for the need. Units improvise, wrapping feet in extra socks, stuffing newspaper inside boots for insulation, wearing every layer of clothing they can find. Some men develop trench foot, the same condition that plagued soldiers in World War I, feet that rot from constant moisture and cold, that swell until boots cannot be worn, that smell of decay and infection. The only treatment is evacuation to rear areas for warmth and drying. Every cold weather casualty is a soldier lost to the division, sometimes temporarily, but often permanently. January 30th brings the 99th to the Siegfried Line, Germany's western fortifications, a belt of concrete bunkers and anti-tank obstacles that runs for hundreds of miles along the border. The fortifications in the 99th sector consist of 247 pillboxes arranged in 3 defensive belts. Each pillbox, a small fortress with 8-foot concrete walls, interlocking fields of fire, underground connections to neighboring positions. Taking these fortifications will require tactics the 99th has never used: coordination between infantry and engineers, use of flamethrowers and satchel charges and specialized equipment. The training for this begins immediately. Engineers demonstrate how to approach a pillbox without being killed, how to place explosives against embrasures, how to use smoke to mask movement. Infantry squads practice assaulting mock-ups of bunkers, learning timing and positioning, discovering through trial and error what works and what gets people killed. The practice is frustrating because the tactics are not intuitive, because everything depends on perfect timing, because mistakes in training cause embarrassment, but mistakes in combat cause death. The offensive operations from January 1st through January 30th transform the 99th from defenders to attackers, from soldiers who hold ground to soldiers who take ground. The cost is visible in casualty lists, in aid stations filled with wounded, in the exhausted faces of men who have been in combat without significant rest for 44 days. But the division is still functional, still capable of offensive operations, still pushing forward despite losses. On January 31st, General Lauer receives new orders. The 99th will spearhead the assault on the Siegfried Line fortifications beginning February 1st. The objective is to break through all 3 defensive belts and reach open ground beyond. Intelligence estimates the operation will take 4 to 6 days. The estimate is optimistic. The Siegfried Line will consume the 99th for 2 weeks, will cost more casualties than any previous operation, will test the division in ways that defensive combat never did. But on January 31st, the soldiers do not know this. They clean weapons and check equipment and write letters home, letters that try to sound confident but cannot quite hide the fear that offensive operations always create. Tomorrow they will attack concrete fortifications defended by soldiers who know the ground and have every advantage except initiative. Tomorrow, the 99th will discover whether teenagers can break defenses that were designed to be unbreakable. February 2nd, 1945, 0600. The village of Udenbrecht sits at the edge of the Siegfried Line, the last German settlement before the fortifications begin. Behind it, visible in the gray dawn, rises the concrete hell that the 99th Infantry Division must penetrate. Pillboxes squat on high ground like giant toads, their embrasures watching every approach, their walls thick enough to shrug off anything except direct hits from the largest artillery. Dragon's teeth, concrete pyramids designed to stop tanks, march in rows across fields and through forests. Wire entanglements, miles of it, channel movement into killing zones. This is the West Wall, the Siegfried Line, Germany's ultimate defense against invasion from the West. It was built in the 1930s when Hitler still feared France, was reinforced and expanded when American armies approached, now stands as the last barrier before the industrial heart of the Rhineland. Breaking through requires tactics the 99th has never used, courage the soldiers have never needed, and casualties they cannot afford. Lieutenant Colonel William McKinley, commanding the 1st Battalion of the 394th Infantry Regiment, studies the first pillbox through binoculars and feels his stomach tighten. The concrete structure looks impregnable. His battalion must take it in 4 hours or the entire assault schedule collapses. He orders the attack to begin. The first assault uses textbook tactics learned from manuals written by officers who never fought in these conditions. Infantry advances under covering fire from mortars and machine guns. At 200 yards from the pillbox, the assault team rushes forward, carrying satchel charges designed to be placed against the embrasure and detonated. The covering fire has no effect on concrete 8 feet thick. The machine guns inside the pillbox open fire at 100 yards, catching the assault team in the open. All 7 men go down, some killed instantly, some wounded and screaming, some simply lying still in shock. The survivors crawl back to the start line, dragging wounded when possible, leaving dead behind. The attack has lasted 7 minutes and accomplished nothing. McKinley watches through binoculars and calculates. 40 minutes per attempt, 2 attempts per hour, 8 hours of daylight remaining. The mathematics suggest his battalion will be destroyed before taking a single pillbox. He calls for different tactics. The engineers arrive with specialized equipment that exists only because someone in Washington anticipated this exact problem. Flamethrowers, tanks that spray burning fuel up to 70 yards, Bangalore torpedoes, long pipes filled with explosives that can be pushed under wire and detonated to create gaps. Beehive charges, shaped explosives designed specifically for bunker warfare. Smoke grenades to mask movement. The engineers explain their plan. Smoke will blind the pillbox. Infantry will advance under cover. Flamethrower teams will spray the embrasure, forcing defenders away from weapons. Assault teams will place charges. Everyone withdraws, charges detonate, infantry rushes the breach. It sounds simple. McKinley has been in combat long enough to know that simple plans become complicated when people start shooting. But it is better than the alternative, which is frontal assault into machine gun fire. The second attack begins at 0900. The smoke works better than expected. Dense white clouds that completely obscure the pillbox. The infantry advances through it, unable to see more than 10 feet, navigating by compass bearing and shouted directions. The flamethrower team, 2 men carrying 70 pounds of equipment, reaches the embrasure and fires. Burning fuel streams through the opening, splashing against concrete interior walls, creating heat and smoke and terror inside. German soldiers inside have a choice: die in the fire or abandon the position. Most choose to abandon, stumbling out of rear exits coughing and burned. American infantry waiting at those exits take them prisoner. The assault team places satchel charges against the embrasure and withdraws. The detonation is muffled by concrete but effective, blowing a hole large enough for men to enter. Infantry pours through, clearing the interior with grenades and rifle fire, securing the first pillbox of the day. Casualties: 12 wounded, 1 killed. Time elapsed: 40 minutes. McKinley looks at his map and counts the remaining pillboxes in his sector: 86. At 40 minutes per pillbox, that is 57 hours of continuous combat. Assuming everything goes perfectly, which it never does. The tactics that work at 0900 fail at 1100 when the Germans adjust. The smoke is anticipated, countered by pre-registered mortar fire that lands on predicted American positions. The flamethrower team is targeted by snipers before reaching the embrasure, both men killed. The assault bogs down, caught between pillbox fire and mortar fire, unable to advance or retreat. The company commander calls for artillery support, but discovers that artillery is ineffective against reinforced concrete unless shells hit directly on target. A near impossible feat at 2-mile range. The attack stalls. Casualties mount. By noon, the 2nd Battalion has lost 30 men and gained 1 pillbox. The mathematics are unsustainable. McKinley requests permission to halt the attack and regroup. Permission is denied. The schedule requires 3 pillboxes per day minimum. The assault must continue. The afternoon brings innovation born of desperation. Tank destroyers, M10 vehicles mounting 76mm guns, are brought forward to engage pillboxes with direct fire. The first destroyer positions itself 800 yards from a target and fires armor-piercing rounds at the embrasure. The first shot misses. The second hits, but ricochets off concrete. The third punches through, detonating inside the pillbox with devastating effect. The structure does not collapse, but becomes untenable, smoke and shrapnel making it impossible for defenders to remain. They surrender or die. The tank destroyer tactic works, but the vehicles are vulnerable to German anti-tank guns, and losses begin accumulating. By evening, 2 destroyers are knocked out, crews killed or wounded. The exchange rate favors neither side. Both are losing equipment and men faster than replacements arrive, but the American supply line is longer and more robust. The German supply line is collapsing under Allied air attack and fuel shortages. Time favors the attacker if the attacker can endure the cost. February 5th brings a breakthrough, tactical and psychological. The 99th has been attacking the same belt of pillboxes for 3 days, has suffered 430 casualties, has captured 23 pillboxes. Now they reach a gap in the fortifications, a section where terrain made construction difficult, and German engineers left a 400-yard opening protected only by wire and mines. Engineers clear the mines working at night, probing with bayonets, marking safe paths with white tape. Infantry advances through the gap at dawn, bypassing the remaining pillboxes in the first belt, penetrating to the second belt before German forces can respond. The advance creates chaos in German defensive plans, which assumed the first belt would hold for days. Suddenly, American infantry is behind positions that are supposed to be unbreachable, attacking bunkers from the rear where defenses are weakest. The second belt collapses faster than the first, pillboxes falling in hours rather than days. By February 8th, the 99th has penetrated both defensive belts and is approaching the third and final line. The final belt is the strongest, pillboxes positioned on high ground with overlapping fields of fire, defended by troops who know this is the last line before open country. The German commanders commit their reserves, a battalion of Volksgrenadier infantry plus assault guns, attempting to stop the American breakthrough before it becomes irreversible. The result is the largest counterattack the 99th has faced since the Bulge. 3,000 German soldiers attacking American positions on February 12th with orders to push the Americans back through the Siegfried Line entirely. The attack hits at 0400, darkness used to mask the approach. achieving surprise that drives American forward companies back in disorder. For 3 hours, the battle hangs in balance. Germans advancing, Americans retreating, the hard-won gains of 10 days threatening to evaporate. Then artillery intervenes, massed fire falling on German formations, breaking their cohesion, forcing them to ground. American infantry counterattacks at 0700, retaking lost positions in brutal close combat that leaves bodies in every building. By noon, the German counterattack has been defeated, but the cost is visible in American aid stations overwhelmed with wounded. The final pillbox falls on February 16th, 15 days after the assault began. The 99th has destroyed 89 pillboxes, captured 158 intact, lost 1,247 men, killed or wounded. The casualty rate is the highest of any 2-week period in the division's history, exceeding even the initial German assault in December. But they have broken through. The Siegfried Line, Germany's impregnable fortress, has been penetrated. American forces pour through the gap, tanks and trucks and following infantry, exploiting the breakthrough before German forces can establish new defensive lines. The 99th, battered and depleted, watches the exploitation force pass through their positions and feels a satisfaction mixed with exhaustion. They open the door, others are walking through it. This is how offensives work. Assault divisions break defenses. Exploitation forces capitalize on breakthroughs. The glory goes to the exploiters. The casualties go to the assault divisions. On February 17th, the division receives orders to pull back for rest and refitting. They have been in continuous combat for 62 days, longer than any American division in the European theater. The survivors, and they are all survivors now, because anyone who has been with the division since December has survived multiple situations that should have killed them, react to the orders with muted relief. Rest sounds impossible, too good to be true. They have forgotten what rest feels like, what it means to sleep without fear of attack, what it means to eat hot food or shower or change clothes. The simple acts of peacetime life have become luxuries they can barely imagine. As they file back from the Siegfried Line toward rear areas, they pass fresh divisions moving forward, soldiers who look impossibly clean and rested. The veterans say nothing to these new troops, offer no advice or warnings. The fresh divisions will learn what the 99th learned. You cannot teach combat. You can only survive it and be changed by it in ways that make you stranger to the person you were before. The concrete hell has been conquered, but the cost is written in the faces of soldiers who will never be 19 again, even if their birth certificates say otherwise. February 18th, 1945. The town of Schleiden sits 12 miles inside Germany, a collection of stone buildings and narrow streets that would be unremarkable except for what the 395th Infantry Regiment discovers in a warehouse on the eastern edge. The building is surrounded by barbed wire, guards posted at entrances, signs warning civilians away. When American soldiers force the doors, they find 800 people in conditions that defy immediate comprehension, men and women packed into a space designed for storing grain, sleeping on concrete floors, emaciated to the point that bones show through skin, dressed in striped rags that might have once been clothing. The smell hits the soldiers first, unwashed bodies and human waste and sickness. A miasma so thick it forces some men to vomit. These are slave laborers, forced workers brought from occupied territories to fuel German war production. Belgian miners, French factory workers, Polish farmers, Russian prisoners of war. All of them worked until they collapsed, fed barely enough to keep them alive, beaten when they slowed. The American soldiers, teenagers themselves, most only 20 years old, stare at these people and cannot process what they are seeing. This is not combat. This is something else, something their training never prepared them for. Evidence of a systematic cruelty that transforms the war from a military conflict into something closer to a moral crusade. Lieutenant Robert MacDonald, commanding a rifle company in the 395th, is one of the first officers to enter the warehouse. He will later write in his memoir that the moment changed his understanding of what the 99th was fighting for. Until Schleiden, the war was about tactics and survival, about taking ground and holding it, about defeating German military forces. Personal hatred of Germans was rare. Most American soldiers viewed Wehrmacht troops as professionals doing their jobs, as enemies in uniform, but not as embodiments of evil. The warehouse shatters this perspective. These people were not prisoners of war, entitled to Geneva Convention protections. They were slaves, worked until they died, disposed of when they became too weak to be useful. MacDonald organizes his men to provide food and medical care, but the company medic warns against giving too much food too quickly. Starvation victims cannot process normal rations. Their digestive systems have shut down. Too much food too fast will kill them, so the soldiers provide broth and bread in small portions. Watch as people weep over a crust of bread. Realize the depth of privation these workers endured. The slave labor camp at Schleiden is the first of 4 the 99th liberates in February and March as they push deeper into Germany. Each camp reveals the same pattern: forced workers from across occupied Europe, minimal food, brutal working conditions, guards who beat or shot anyone who resisted. The camps exist to support German war production, to provide labor for factories and mines when German men are conscripted for military service. The economics are simple and horrifying. A slave worker costs nothing except minimal food. If they die, replacements are available from occupied territories. Productivity per worker is lower than the free labor, but the sheer number of workers compensates. Millions of people across occupied Europe have been forced into this system. The 99th is seeing only a tiny fraction, but even this fraction is enough to change how soldiers view the enemy. This is not honorable warfare. This is exploitation on an industrial scale, cruelty systematized and bureaucratized, evil made routine. February 22nd brings a different kind of discovery. A patrol from the 394th Regiment, investigating a snow-covered field near the village of Bulge in Belgium, finds bodies. American bodies. Soldiers in United States Army uniforms, lying in rows, hands still bound behind their backs, bullet wounds to the head. The patrol calls for their platoon leader, who calls for the company commander, who calls for battalion. By afternoon, investigators from higher command arrive with cameras and notebooks. They count 84 bodies, all American prisoners of war, all executed. The investigation reveals what happened here on December the 17th, one day after the German offensive began. American soldiers from the 285th Field Artillery Observation Battalion were captured by Kampfgruppe Piper, a unit of the 1st SS Panzer Division. The prisoners were disarmed and herded into this field. German soldiers opened fire with machine guns. Those who survived the initial shooting were finished with pistol shots to the head. The massacre violated every convention of war, every standard of military conduct. Prisoners are supposed to be protected, not murdered. The soldiers of the 99th who view these bodies understand with sudden clarity what would have happened to them if they had surrendered at different times, different places. Buch's platoon at Lanzerath was captured by regular Wehrmacht infantry, who treated them according to military law. Others were not so fortunate. The Bulge massacre, later known as the Malmedy massacre after the nearest town, transforms American attitudes toward German prisoners. Before February, capture and surrender followed standard procedures. Prisoners were disarmed, searched, sent to rear areas for interrogation, then transferred to prisoner of war camps. After Bulge, some American units stopped taking prisoners, at least temporarily, at least from SS units. Soldiers who discover the bodies write letters home describing what they found, and the letters are censored by Army mail readers who recognize that this information might inflame public opinion beyond control. The censorship is partial. Enough details leak through that. By March, American newspapers are reporting German atrocities against prisoners. The effect on morale is complex. Some soldiers become more willing to fight, understanding that surrender might mean death. Others become more cautious, more fearful, less willing to take risks that might result in capture. The discovery creates a feedback loop of violence. German atrocities justify American revenge. American revenge hardens German resistance. Both sides become more brutal, more willing to violate the rules that are supposed to limit war's destruction. March 1st brings the liberation of a forced labor camp near Rheinbach, and here the 99th finds something they have not seen before: children. Not many, perhaps 20, ages ranging from 8 to 14, all of them skeletal, all of them with the same hollow-eyed stare that marks prolonged starvation. These children were brought from Poland when their parents were conscripted for labor, were kept in the camp to ensure parents' compliance, were fed even less than adults because they had no productive value. Private James Sullivan, who has been in combat since December 16th, who has killed German soldiers without remorse, who has hardened himself against the suffering of war, breaks down when he sees these children. He sits in the snow and cries, great racking sobs that he cannot control, while his squad mates stand awkwardly nearby, unsure how to respond. The medics who treat the children discover evidence of systematic abuse, beatings, and worse, crimes that transform soldiers' anger into something colder and more permanent. When German civilians in Rheinbach claim they knew nothing about the camp, American soldiers do not believe them. The camp was in the center of town. The smell alone would have been noticeable from hundreds of yards away. Claiming ignorance requires willful blindness that American soldiers are not willing to excuse. The discoveries continue through March as the 99th advances deeper into Germany. They find more labor camps. They find mass graves dug by German troops for their own dead, but sometimes containing civilian bodies, Belgian and French and Polish, people who were in the wrong place when German forces needed to clear an area. They interview Belgian civilians who witnessed German executions of American prisoners in December, old men and women who hid in basements, while SS troops shot captured soldiers in the streets of Krinkelt and Rocherath. Each discovery adds to the accumulating evidence that the war the 99th is fighting is not just about territory or politics, but about stopping something fundamentally evil. This realization does not make combat easier. If anything, it makes combat harder because the stakes are higher, because losing means allowing this system to continue. March 5th brings a memorial service at Bagnères, organized by division and chaplains who feel some form of recognition is necessary for the murdered prisoners. Soldiers from the 99th attend, standing in the snow around the field where bodies were found, listening to prayers and hymns and trying to make sense of what happened here. Father Francis Sampson, a division chaplain who will later be famous for his service during the war, delivers a homily that avoids mentioning revenge but cannot avoid mentioning justice. These men died as prisoners. They should have been protected. Their murder demands accountability. The soldiers listen and understand what is not being said directly. This war cannot end with simple military victory. There must be trials. There must be punishment for those who violated the laws of war. The notion of war crimes trials is new, untested, controversial. But standing in a field where 84 American soldiers were murdered, the idea seems not just appropriate, but necessary. March 8th brings a conversation that MacDonald records in his diary, an exchange with a German prisoner that reveals how different the two sides' experiences have been. The prisoner, a lieutenant from a Volksgrenadier division, speaks English and answers questions about why Germany is still fighting. He explains that soldiers fight because orders demand it, because desertion means execution, because Germany is their home and they are defending it. MacDonald asks about the labor camps, about the executions of prisoners. The German lieutenant claims to know nothing about these things, insists that the Wehrmacht is a professional military organization that follows international law. The SS, he says, is a different organization, a political force that does not represent the German army. MacDonald does not believe this distinction matters. The Wehrmacht and SS fight for the same government, serve the same leadership, enable the same atrocities through their military success. Claiming separation is claiming innocence that the evidence does not support. The conversation ends without resolution, both men understanding that the gap between their perspectives is too wide to bridge. The psychological effect of these discoveries on the 99th's soldiers is profound and permanent. They entered combat in December as teenagers fighting a war they barely understood, defending ground because orders said to defend it. They emerged from the Ardennes as soldiers who had proven themselves in the hardest kind of combat. Now, in March, they are becoming something else, witnesses to atrocities that will define how they remember the war for the rest of their lives. When asked in later years why they fought, many will mention these discoveries: the labor camps, the executed prisoners, the children starving in warehouses. These are not abstractions or propaganda, but things they saw with their own eyes. Evidence that makes the war's purpose clear in ways that political speeches and military objectives never could. The 99th Infantry Division is no longer fighting just to defeat German military forces. They are fighting to stop a system that treats human beings as disposable resources, that murders prisoners, that enslaves millions. This knowledge does not make them more eager for combat. Most would still prefer to go home, to return to lives interrupted by war. But it makes them more certain that the war must be won, that compromise is impossible, that the only acceptable outcome is Germany's complete defeat. The discoveries of February and March transform the moral calculus of combat, turn a military conflict into something closer to a crusade, and leave scars on soldiers' souls that no amount of time will fully heal. March 7th, 1945. The bridge at Remagen stands intact across the Rhine River, a railway bridge called the Ludendorff that German engineers were supposed to demolish before American forces arrived. Something went wrong with the demolition. The charges fired but failed to drop the spans. Now, elements of the 9th Armored Division are racing across, seizing a bridgehead on the east bank before German forces can organize counterattacks. The news reaches V Corps headquarters within hours, generates excitement that spreads through every American unit in the region. The Rhine is Germany's last natural barrier, a river 300 yards wide, with currents that make unopposed crossing difficult and opposed crossing nearly impossible. Allied planners expected the Rhine crossings to be major set-piece operations, requiring weeks of preparation and thousands of casualties. Instead, through German error and American opportunism, a bridge stands intact. Every available unit is ordered to exploit this breakthrough. The 99th Infantry Division, resting after the Siegfried Line assault, receives movement orders on March 8th. Get to Remagen, cross the river. Establish positions on the east bank. The race to Germany's heart is beginning, and the battle babies are running. The movement to Remagen covers 50 miles in 36 hours, a logistical achievement that requires every truck the division can requisition, plus commandeered German vehicles and captured horses pulling supply wagons. The roads are clogged with American forces all moving in the same direction, all trying to reach the bridge before German forces can destroy it or the structure collapses under the weight of traffic it was never designed to handle. The 99th reaches Remagen on March 9th and joins the queue of units waiting to cross. The bridge is a bottleneck, only wide enough for one-way traffic, meaning vehicles must alternate crossing with precision timing to prevent jams. German artillery fires on the bridge from positions east of the river. Shells falling close enough to send up geysers of water, but not quite finding the range for direct hits. Engineers work frantically to reinforce the structure, adding supports, repairing damage from the failed demolition, praying the whole thing does not collapse into the river. At 1400 hours, the first elements of the 99th begin crossing. Infantry on foot, moving in single file along the railway ties. Vehicles spaced to minimize weight on any one section. The crossing takes 6 hours. Every soldier who walks across looks at the water 300 yards below and thinks about what happens if the bridge collapses mid-crossing. March 11th brings the moment officers have prepared for and soldiers have dreaded. The 99th is ordered to attack east from the bridgehead, to expand the perimeter before German forces can contain it. The objective is to advance 10 miles in the first day, reaching positions that will allow follow-on forces to exploit toward the Autobahn system. Intelligence reports indicate German forces in the area are fragmented, composed of ad hoc battle groups thrown together from rear area units. Lacking heavy weapons or cohesion, this assessment is partially correct. German resistance is disorganized compared to the Siegfried Line or the Ardennes. But disorganized does not mean absent. The 99th's advance runs into machine gun positions, roadblocks, minefields, all the standard techniques of delaying action. Progress is slower than planned. By nightfall, the division has advanced 6 miles instead of 10, suffering 212 casualties in the process. The mathematics of advance have changed since February. Then, every yard cost blood. Now, miles are gained for hundreds of casualties instead of thousands. The German army is collapsing, not in morale, but in capability, unable to replace losses, unable to establish coherent defensive lines, fighting because orders demand it, but knowing the war is lost. March the 17th brings disaster and survival in equal measure. The Ludendorff Bridge at Remagen, weakened by the attempted demolition, stressed by 2 weeks of heavy traffic, finally collapses. The structure drops into the Rhine at 1500 hours, killing 28 American engineers who were working on reinforcements. The collapse cuts the 99th supply line, leaves them dependent on ferries and pontoon bridges being constructed by engineer battalions. But the collapse does not stop the advance because by March 17th, the 99th is already 15 miles east of the Rhine, has advanced beyond the range where the bridge's collapse matters operationally. The logisticians will struggle. The engineers will work day and night, building alternative crossings. But the combat units are already loose in Germany's interior, exploiting confusion, racing toward objectives before German forces can organize defense. This is what breakthrough looks like. Not the clean breakthrough of training exercises, but the chaotic exploitation of enemy collapse, confusion on both sides, units moving faster than maps can track. April 1st brings a milestone that would have seemed impossible 4 months ago. The 99th links up with elements of the 18th Airborne Corps, creating a continuous American line that encircles the Ruhr industrial region. 325,000 German troops are trapped inside this pocket. Entire divisions and corps cut off from supply and reinforcement. The encirclement is Germany's largest military disaster of the war on the Western Front, comparable to Stalingrad in scale, if not in savagery. The trapped forces include veteran units and raw recruits, factory workers pressed into emergency service, and old men from Volkssturm home defense battalions. Over the next 2 weeks, American forces will compress this pocket, will force surrenders in numbers that overwhelm prisoner processing systems. The 99th's role in creating this encirclement is small, one division among many, but their advance helped close the trap, helped create the conditions for mass capitulation. The prisoners arrive in numbers that defy processing capabilities. On April 3rd, the 394th Regiment captures 2,000 German soldiers who simply walk out of the forest with hands raised, no fight left in them, wanting only to surrender before Soviet forces can reach them from the east. The regiment has no facilities for this many prisoners, no food to feed them, no guards to watch them. They are disarmed and directed to march west toward collection points, essentially released on their honor to surrender themselves. Most do. Some disappear into the countryside, trying to reach homes before the war officially ends. The flood of prisoners reveals how thoroughly German military cohesion has collapsed. These are not units surrendering under orders from commanders. These are individuals and small groups making their own decisions that continuing to fight serves no purpose. April 11th marks the furthest advance, the 99th reaching the Westerwald region 60 miles east of the Rhine. Here, in rolling hills covered with second-growth forest, the division receives orders to halt. The advance has outrun supply lines. Units need time to consolidate, to absorb replacements, to refit equipment worn out by 5 weeks of continuous movement. The halt is welcome. Soldiers who have been advancing every day since March 7th collapse in exhaustion, sleeping 16 hours straight, waking disoriented, unable to remember what day it is. The pace of exploitation warfare is different from the pace of assault or defense. In assault, you fight for hours, then rest. In defense, you hold position with predictable rhythms. In exploitation, you move constantly, never stopping long enough to establish routine, always pushing toward new objectives. The psychological toll is different but equally demanding. Men become automatons, following orders without thought, eating and sleeping and marching without conscious awareness, operating on instinct and training. The advance from Remagen to the Westerwald covers 180 miles in 33 days, averaging 5.5 miles per day, a pace that would have been unthinkable in December or February. The casualties for this period total 412 killed, 1,890 wounded, significantly lower rates than earlier operations despite the distance covered. The explanation is simple: German resistance is collapsing. The Wehrmacht is no longer capable of sustained defense. Units fight delaying actions and withdraw. Strong points hold briefly and surrender. The mass armies that defended the Siegfried Line have been destroyed or encircled or dispersed. What remains are fragments, battle groups, and scratch units thrown together from whoever is available, fighting because they are German soldiers, and fighting is what soldiers do, but knowing that the end is approaching. American soldiers sense this change. The Germans they face now are different from the Germans of December, less aggressive, more willing to surrender, defending out of obligation rather than belief in victory. The exploitation phase reveals the human cost of 5 months of combat on the 99th's cohesion. The division that crosses the Rhine in March bears little resemblance to the division that landed in Belgium in November. Of the original 14,181 men who deployed, only 5,200 remain with the division. The rest are dead or wounded or scattered. 9,000 replacements have arrived since December, fresh troops from training camps who never knew the original 99th, who wear the checkerboard patch but do not share the experiences that define the division's identity. The veterans, the men who survived Lanzerath and Krinkelt-Rocherath and Elsenborn and the Siegfried Line, are a minority now. They stick together, form informal groups based on shared experience, regard replacements with the same mixture of pity and distance that veterans always show to newcomers. This social division is normal in combat units, expected, even healthy in some ways, but it means the 99th is no longer a single coherent organization, but a collection of subgroups, each with different experiences and expectations. April 15th brings new orders. The 99th will hold current positions and prepare for occupation duties. The war is not officially over, but the combat phase is effectively finished for the division. Other units will handle the final drives into central Germany. The 99th has fought far enough. They have earned rest. The soldiers receive this news with reactions ranging from relief to disbelief. After 5 months of continuous operations, the idea that combat might be ending seems impossible. They have been fighting so long that peace feels like a theoretical concept, something discussed but never experienced. Officers warn against complacency. The war is not over until Germany surrenders. Until then, vigilance remains necessary. But the warnings lack conviction. Everyone can feel the change in atmosphere, can sense that the Wehrmacht is finished, that the remaining combat is epilogue rather than climax. On April 15, 1945, the 99th Infantry Division's combat operations come to a quiet end 60 miles inside Germany, in positions they will hold until Germany's final surrender 3 weeks later. The journey from Camp Van Dorn, Mississippi, to the Westerwald has consumed 31 months and changed everyone who made it. The distance on a map is 4,000 miles. The actual distance measured in experience and loss and transformation is incalculable. April 16, 1945. The Dusseldorf Pocket, a shrinking perimeter of German resistance north of the Ruhr, holds approximately 15,000 Wehrmacht troops who have not yet surrendered. The 99th Infantry Division receives orders to participate in reducing this pocket, to apply pressure that will force capitulation without requiring bloody assault. The soldiers accept these orders with resignation rather than enthusiasm. They are exhausted. They have been in combat for 121 days with only brief respites for rest and refitting. The idea of more fighting, more casualties, more death when the war's outcome is already decided strikes many as pointless, but orders are orders. At 0600 on April 16th, the 99th attacks the Dusseldorf Pocket from the south, advancing against sporadic resistance from troops who seem more interested in delaying than defending. The combat is strange, anticlimactic, lacking the intensity of earlier battles. German soldiers fight from positions until Americans approach within rifle range, then withdraw to new positions and repeat the process. They are buying time, waiting for formal surrender orders, trying to stay alive until the shooting officially stops. April 18th brings the moment soldiers have been hoping for since December. At 1400 hours, German forces in the Ruhr pocket surrender en masse, 325,000 troops laying down weapons in the largest capitulation on the Western Front. The surrender is conducted by radio, orders transmitted from Field Marshal Walter Model to all units under his command. Resistance will cease. Soldiers will assemble at designated points for prisoner processing. The war for these men is over. The 99th receives notification of the surrender at 14:30 and passes the word to forward companies. Cease fire, hold positions, accept surrenders. The actual moment is less dramatic than expected. Shooting simply stops. German soldiers emerge from positions with hands raised. American soldiers disarm them without conversation, both sides going through motions that have become routine. There is no celebration. The surrender is too large, too impersonal, to generate the kind of relief that comes from surviving a specific battle. This is administrative, the paperwork of ending a war. April 20th is Adolf Hitler's 56th birthday, a date that would have been marked in previous years with military parades and Nazi propaganda celebrations. This year, Hitler is hiding in a bunker in Berlin while Soviet forces close in from all directions. In the 99th's area, the day passes without event. Soldiers write letters home, describing the surrender, trying to explain what it feels like to stop fighting after 4 months of continuous combat. Private James Sullivan writes to his mother, "We won. I don't know what I expected winning to feel like, but it wasn't this. Mostly I feel tired. Everyone is tired. We keep waiting to be happy, but the happy hasn't arrived yet." The letter captures something essential about the disconnect between victory and emotion. In movies, wars end with celebrations and relief and joy. In reality, wars end with exhaustion and disbelief and the slow realization that survival is not the same as triumph. The processing of German prisoners reveals the scope of Wehrmacht collapse. Among the surrendering troops are grandfathers in their 60s and boys in their early teens, both pressed into emergency service as Germany's manpower reserves evaporated. The 99th soldiers look at these prisoners and feel a mixture of contempt and pity. These are the forces that were supposed to defend Germany? These old men and children? The professional Wehrmacht divisions that fought in December and February are gone, destroyed, or captured or dispersed. What remains is the bottom of the barrel, the last desperate scraping of a nation that has run out of soldiers. Conversations with prisoners reveal that many knew the war was lost months ago, that they continued fighting only because desertion meant execution and surrender was not permitted. Some express relief at being captured by Americans rather than Soviets, having heard stories about Eastern Front brutality that make American captivity seem preferable. Others are simply numb, too exhausted to care about their fate. May 7th brings the news that Germany has surrendered unconditionally, that the war in Europe is officially over. The announcement reaches the 99th at 0800 through radio broadcasts and official notifications. General Eisenhower has accepted German surrender at his headquarters in Reims, France. All German armed forces will cease operations at 23:01 on May 8th. The war is over. Victory in Europe is achieved. The 99th soldiers receive this news in their positions near Kassel, Germany, where they have been in occupation duty for 3 weeks. The reactions are muted. Some men cheer, some shake hands, some simply nod and go back to whatever they were doing. The disconnect between expectation and reality is stark. They expected to feel joy, relief, exultation. Instead, they feel mostly tired and empty and unsure what comes next. Lieutenant MacDonald writes in his diary, "The war ended today. I thought I would be happy. I'm not unhappy. I'm just nothing. Hollow." May 8th, VE Day, Victory in Europe. Day arrives with celebrations in London and New York and Paris, with crowds in the streets and kisses exchanged with strangers and newspapers declaring the defeat of Nazi Germany. In the 99th's area, the day passes quietly. Division commanders organize a formation at noon, all available troops assembled to hear official announcements about the German surrender. General Lauer speaks briefly, praising the division's accomplishments, honoring the men who did not survive to see this day. The chaplains lead prayers, the national anthem is played, the formation is dismissed. Soldiers return to their duties, which now consist mainly of guard duty over displaced persons camps and routine patrols to prevent looting. The celebration, such as it is, happens in small groups, men sharing bottles of captured German schnapps or wine, telling stories about battles survived, remembering friends who are not here to celebrate. The roster of the dead is incomplete because record-keeping during combat was imperfect. Because men listed as missing might be prisoners or might be dead in unmarked graves because the chaos of 5 months of continuous operations destroyed documentation. The preliminary count shows 4,599 soldiers killed or missing, another 12,000 wounded. These numbers represent a 116% casualty rate, possible only because replacements were wounded or killed after joining the division. Some men were wounded multiple times, evacuated and returned and wounded again. Some companies have casualty rates exceeding 200%, meaning every position was filled an average of 3 times over 5 months. The mathematics of attrition warfare make these numbers possible, but do not make them comprehensible. How does a division function when it loses more men than it contains? How does unit cohesion survive when most soldiers are replacements? The answer is that cohesion does not survive intact. What survives is structure and command and the skeleton of organization onto which new soldiers are grafted. The awards and decorations tell another story of the division's service. 2 medals of honor have been awarded, both posthumous, recognizing soldiers who died, performing acts of extraordinary heroism. 47 Distinguished Service Crosses, the second highest award for valor, represent battles fought and won through exceptional courage. 850 Silver Stars mark soldiers who distinguished themselves in combat. Thousands of Bronze Stars recognize meritorious service or valor in lesser degree. But the decorations are incomplete because many acts of heroism went unrecorded, because witnesses were killed, because the chaos of combat prevented proper documentation. Lyle Bouck's platoon at Lanzerath fought one of the most consequential small unit actions of the war, but they received no immediate recognition because no one survived in positions to witness and document what they did. This pattern repeats across the division's history. The soldiers who most deserved recognition often died before anyone could recommend them for it. The question everyone asks is, what happens now? The war in Europe is over, but the war against Japan continues. American divisions are being redeployed to the Pacific, preparing for the invasion of Japan that military planners estimate will cost hundreds of thousands of casualties. Will the 99th go to the Pacific? The soldiers do not know. Officers do not know. Even General Lauer does not know. The decisions are being made in Washington and at Supreme Headquarters, calculating which divisions are worn out beyond repair and which can be refitted and redeployed. The 99th's casualties suggest they are in the first category, too depleted to be effective without months of rest and replacement. But war does not follow logical patterns. Orders might come tomorrow, sending them east. So the soldiers wait, unable to plan, unable to relax, caught in the limbo between wars. August 15th brings the answer to that question in a form no one expected. Japan surrenders unconditionally following atomic bomb attacks on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The Pacific War is over. World War II is over. No invasion of Japan will be necessary. No redeployment to the Pacific will happen. The 99th Infantry Division will not fight again. The soldiers receive this news with relief so profound it produces physical symptoms. Men trembling or crying or laughing in ways that border on hysteria. They are going home, not immediately because occupation duties must be performed and the army does not move quickly, but eventually. They will see their families again. They will return to lives interrupted by war. The future, which seemed impossible to imagine during combat, suddenly becomes real. On August 15, 1945, soldiers of the 99th Infantry Division begin the slow psychological transition from warriors to veterans, from men defined by combat to men who must learn to live without it. The transition will take years for some, decades for others. For some, it will never be complete. Combat changes people in ways that peace cannot undo. But at least they have the chance to try, a chance denied to the 4,500 who died in Belgian snow and German forests, whose graves mark the distance between Camp Von Dorn and victory. May 10, 1945. The city of Kassel sits in ruins, 80% of structures destroyed by Allied bombing and artillery. Streets clogged with rubble that makes vehicle movement nearly impossible. Into this devastation marches the 99th Infantry Division, assigned to occupation duties in a region stretching from Kassel to Marburg, 890 square miles containing 470,000 German civilians. The mission is vague, defined more by what it prevents than what it accomplishes. Prevent looting, maintain order, enforce denazification programs, assist displaced persons returning to home countries, begin the process of transforming Germany from enemy nation to occupied territory governed by military law. The soldiers accept these orders with confusion. They train for combat, not occupation. They know how to take a pillbox, but not how to govern a city. They know how to fight German soldiers, but not how to interact with German civilians who claim innocence, who insist they knew nothing about labor camps or atrocities, who want only to rebuild their lives. The transition from warrior to occupier requires skills the army never taught. The first task is establishing headquarters and billeting troops. The division requisitions German buildings that survived the bombing, turning hotels and schools and municipal offices into American facilities. German civilians are evicted with 48 hours' notice, told to find accommodation elsewhere, given no assistance or compensation. The policy is deliberate, designed to make Germans understand they are a conquered people with no rights except what occupation authorities grant them. Some soldiers enforce these evictions enthusiastically, remembering what they found in labor camps, remembering executed prisoners at Baugny. Others enforce them reluctantly, uncomfortable with displacing families that include children and elderly. Private James Sullivan writes in his diary on May 13th, "Today we kicked a German family out of their house so our company could use it as a barracks." The woman cried. Her children looked terrified. I felt like a bully, but then I remembered Schleiden and the children in that warehouse, and I felt less bad. Maybe that makes me a bad person. I don't know anymore. Denazification begins on June 1st, a program designed to remove Nazi party members from positions of authority and influence. Every German adult must fill out a questionnaire detailing their relationship with the Nazi party. Were you a member? What positions did you hold? Did you participate in party activities? The questionnaires are reviewed by American officers who lack the language skills or cultural knowledge to evaluate answers accurately. Most Germans claim minimal involvement. They were forced to join for employment purposes. They never believed the ideology. They secretly opposed Hitler but could not speak out for fear of persecution. The officers conducting interviews quickly realized that everyone in Germany was apparently a secret anti-Nazi, that the Nazi Party, which controlled the nation for 12 years, somehow consisted only of a handful of true believers. The contradiction is obvious but difficult to address. How do you prove someone believed Nazi ideology if they deny it? How do you distinguish genuine opposition from opportunistic claims of innocence? The displaced persons camps present different challenges. Throughout the 99th's occupation zone are temporary camps holding thousands of people liberated from forced labor, former prisoners trying to return home, but stranded by destroyed infrastructure and closed borders. Belgian workers want to return to Belgium, but the railways are damaged and the borders are controlled by military authorities. Polish laborers want to return to Poland, but Poland is now occupied by Soviet forces who view anyone who spent time in the West with suspicion, fearing they have been contaminated by capitalist ideology. Russian prisoners of war face the worst situation. Stalin has declared that any Soviet soldier who surrendered is a traitor. Returning home means facing execution or imprisonment in the Gulag. Many Russian DPs refuse repatriation, begging American authorities for asylum, for any option except return to Soviet control. The 99th soldiers administer these camps with limited resources and no clear guidance. They provide food and shelter and medical care, but they cannot solve the political problems that keep people trapped in Germany. July 4th, 1945, Independence Day. The 99th organizes celebrations that feel forced, artificial, disconnected from the emotions the holiday is supposed to evoke. There is a parade through Kassel's rubble-filled streets. There are speeches about freedom and victory and the American spirit. There is food, more food than soldiers have seen in months, steaks and fresh vegetables and ice cream shipped from rear areas. And there is alcohol, distributed with official sanction. resulting in widespread drunkenness and fights and soldiers doing things they will regret when sober. Lieutenant MacDonald observes the celebrations and writes, "Today we celebrated freedom by getting drunk in a conquered city filled with starving Germans. The contradiction should bother me more than it does." Maybe I am too tired to care about contradictions anymore. The observation captures the moral exhaustion that occupation creates, the difficulty of maintaining clear ethical positions in situations that resist simple judgment. Post-traumatic stress, though the term does not exist yet, manifests throughout the division during occupation. Soldiers wake screaming from nightmares about combat, reliving Elsenborn or the Siegfried Line, or the moment they saw their friend killed. They startle at loud noises, diving for cover when trucks backfire or doors slam. They cannot concentrate, cannot follow conversations, cannot remember simple instructions. Some become aggressive, picking fights over minor provocations, unable to regulate anger that was adaptive in combat but destructive in garrison. Some become withdrawn, sitting alone for hours, speaking only when directly addressed. The division's medical officers recognize these symptoms but lack effective treatments. The prevailing assumption is that time will heal, that soldiers simply need to adjust to peace. For some, this proves true. For others, the symptoms will persist for decades, will destroy marriages and careers and lives, will finally be recognized as post-traumatic stress disorder long after the damage is done. The point system determines who goes home and when. Every soldier accumulates points based on time in service, time overseas, combat decorations, and dependent children. 85 points qualifies for discharge. Most 99th veterans have between 80 and 110 points, enough to go home but not necessarily immediately. The Army processes discharges slowly, prioritizing soldiers with the most points, requiring everyone else to wait. By late July, the first groups begin departing for ports and ships home. They leave behind soldiers who watch with envy and resentment. Why should someone with 90 points go home, while someone with 85 remains? The differentiation seems arbitrary, meaningless. Both men fought the same battles. Both deserve to go home. But the Army requires systems, requires rules, and the rules say 85 points, not 84. September 23rd brings the announcement soldiers have been dreading and hoping for simultaneously. The 99th Infantry Division will be deactivated. The organization that has been their home for 3 years, the unit they joined in Mississippi and deployed to Belgium and fought across Germany, will cease to exist. The deactivation is scheduled for October 15th at Camp Patrick Henry, Virginia. Soldiers still in Germany will be transferred to other divisions or sent home individually based on point totals. The division as a coherent entity will be dissolved, its history archived, its identity preserved only in memory and records. The reaction to this news is complex. Relief that the war is truly over, that the division has served its purpose and can be laid to rest. Sadness that the unit that defined their lives for years is disappearing. Anger that the organization is being discarded as if it never mattered. General Lauer addresses the division one final time, thanking them for their service, praising their accomplishments, acknowledging that disbanding a division feels like abandoning family. But the decision is made. The 99th has fought its war. Now it will become history. August and September see the gradual departure of veterans, replaced by soldiers from other units assigned to occupation duties. The replacements do not wear the checkerboard patch with the same understanding, do not share the experiences that define what it means to be 99th Infantry. They are simply soldiers doing a job, counting days until they can go home, uninterested in maintaining traditions or unit identity. The veterans watch this dilution with resignation. This is how divisions die, not in combat, but in administrative dissolution, identity eroded by personnel changes until the organization exists only on paper. By October 1st, fewer than 2,000 original 99th soldiers remain in Germany. The rest have shipped home or been transferred or are dead. The division that crossed the Rhine in March, that fought through the Siegfried Line in February, that held Elsenborn Ridge in December, exists now only in memory. October 15th, 1945, Camp Patrick Henry, Virginia. The formal deactivation ceremony is brief, perfunctory. attended by officers who never served with the 99th, but who represent Army bureaucracy that must officially end what combat created. The division colors are cased, wrapped in protective covering, placed in storage. General Lauer delivers final remarks praising the division's service, noting casualties and decorations and ground captured. The remarks are sincere, but cannot capture what the division meant to the men who served in it, what they sacrificed, what they accomplished. At 1100 hours, the ceremony ends. The 99th Infantry Division is officially deactivated. Soldiers present are transferred to other units or processing for discharge. The organization ceases to exist except on paper, in records, in memories that will fade as the survivors age and die. November 1st, 1946. The 99th Infantry Division is reactivated as a reserve unit, part of the post-war military structure that maintains trained divisions without keeping them on active duty. The new 99th consists mostly of soldiers who never served in World War II, who wear the checkerboard patch but do not share the combat history. The reactivation is administrative necessity, not continuity of identity. The World War II veterans, now civilians returning to interrupted lives, react to this reactivation with indifference or mild annoyance. Their division was the combat organization that fought in the Ardennes and Siegfried Line. This new unit is something else, wearing the same name but lacking the shared experience that creates true unit cohesion. Over the decades, the Reserve 99th will train and deploy and serve, creating its own history. But for the World War II veterans, the real 99th died at Camp Patrick Henry in October 1945, was buried in administrative paperwork, and can never be truly resurrected. The transition from soldier to veteran, from combat to civilian life, proves more difficult than most expected. Soldiers who survived intense combat often struggle with normal civilian existence that seems trivial by comparison. Jobs feel meaningless. Social interactions feel shallow. The intensity of war, terrible as it was, created bonds and purpose that civilian life cannot replicate. Some veterans cope by staying connected to other 99th survivors, forming associations, organizing reunions, maintaining relationships forged in combat. Others cope by cutting ties completely, by refusing to discuss the war, by trying to forget everything they experienced. Most fall somewhere between, acknowledging their service but not letting it define their entire identity. The process takes years. Some veterans adjust quickly, resuming careers and starting families and integrating back into society. Others struggle for decades, marriages failing, careers stalling, unable to shake the feeling that they left the most important part of themselves in Belgian forests or German bunkers. The Army provides no support for this transition. Veterans are expected to adjust on their own, to get over it, and return to productive civilian life. Most eventually do, carrying invisible scars that never fully heal, but learning to function despite them. The occupation period and aftermath represent the bridge between war and peace, between soldier and veteran, between the organization that fought and the individuals who must rebuild lives interrupted by service. It is a transition the Army does not prepare them for, that no training can anticipate, that each man must navigate alone. 1946. Lyle Book returns to his home in St. Louis, Missouri, exchanges his uniform for civilian clothes, and tries to resume the life that was interrupted when he joined the Army in 1942. He enrolls in university using the GI Bill, studies engineering, dates a girl he knew before the war. On the surface, the transition appears successful. Underneath, something fundamental has changed. Bach cannot stop thinking about Lanzerath, about the 18 men who held a crossroads for 20 hours, about what that stand meant in the larger battle. He begins to research, writing letters to the Army's historical division, requesting after-action reports, trying to document what his platoon accomplished. The response is disappointing. Official Army histories of the Battle of the Bulge devote 3 paragraphs to the 99th Infantry Division. Lanzerath is not mentioned at all. Book's platoon does not appear in any official account. As far as Army history is concerned, their stand never happened. Buck cannot accept this. He knows what they did. He knows they delayed the German offensive. He knows men died holding that position. History cannot simply erase them. The official Army history of the Battle of the Bulge, published in 1946 and revised in 1965, focuses on Bastogne and General Patton's relief column. The narrative emphasizes American resilience, the heroic defense of key positions, the ultimate victory over German aggression. But the account is selective, emphasizing successes while minimizing failures. The intelligence failures that preceded the German attack are downplayed. The initial breakthrough that should have been prevented receives limited coverage. The 99th's role in stopping the northern shoulder is mentioned briefly, acknowledged but not explored. Buch reads these histories with growing frustration. The story they tell is incomplete, sanitized, designed to protect reputations of senior officers who ignored warnings and nearly lost the battle, the soldiers who actually stopped the offensive, the teenagers who held Elsenborn Ridge and died in the Twin Villages, are footnotes in a narrative that credits victory to generals and grand strategy. 1965 brings Buch's first serious attempt to secure recognition for his platoon. He has been researching for 19 years, has collected statements from survivors, has obtained German records through contacts at the Army War College. The German records are revelatory. They confirm that the 1st SS Panzer Division was delayed 20 hours at Lanzerath, that the delay disrupted the entire 6th Panzer Army timetable, that the Lanzerath position was identified in German after-action reports as a critical bottleneck. Armed with this evidence, Buch submits recommendations for Medal of Honor for members of his platoon. The recommendations are detailed, supported by documentation, describing specific acts of heroism performed on December 16, 1944. The recommendations are denied. Reason given, insufficient contemporary documentation. The fact that contemporary documentation was impossible because the platoon was captured and spent the war in prisoner camps does not matter. Army regulations require sworn statements from witnesses, preferably officers, made close in time to the events described. Buch has statements from survivors made 20 years after the fact. This does not meet standards. 1969 brings another attempt, another denial. 1972, the same. Buch becomes known in veteran circles as the man obsessed with getting his platoon recognized, the officer who cannot let go of a battle fought almost 3 decades ago. Some veterans understand and support him. Others wish he would move on, would accept that history is written by victors, and sometimes the full story gets lost. Buch cannot accept this. He increases his research efforts, tracks down German veterans who fought against his platoon, obtains their statements describing the American defense. One German officer, now a civilian engineer in Munich, writes, "We lost over 400 men trying to take that position, 400 against 18. I thought there must be a company defending Lanzerath. When we discovered it was only a platoon, I could not believe it. Your men fought like demons." This statement should be powerful evidence. It is dismissed as uncorroborated foreign testimony. 1977 brings the breakthrough, but not through military channels. A journalist from CBS News, researching Battle of the Bulge anniversaries, discovers Buch's story and recognizes its significance. The network produces a 15-minute segment for the evening news, interviewing Buch and surviving platoon members, presenting the Lanzerath stand to national audience. The broadcast generates public response, letters to the Army demanding recognition for Buch's platoon, congressional inquiries asking why these heroes have been ignored. The Army responds with bureaucratic defensiveness, insisting that proper procedures were followed, that the lack of contemporary documentation makes Medal of Honor impossible, that distinguished unit citation is the appropriate level of recognition. The public pressure creates an opening that Buch exploits, submitting new recommendations that emphasize the importance of the stand rather than individual acts of heroism. 1981, 37 years after the battle, the Presidential Unit Citation is finally awarded to Buch's platoon. The citation acknowledges that 18 men held Lanzerath Crossroads for 20 hours against overwhelming force, that their defense delayed the German offensive, that their stand contributed significantly to the ultimate Allied victory in the Battle of the Bulge. The award ceremony is held at Fort Meade, Maryland. 11 surviving platoon members attend, now in their late 50s and 60s. Civilian clothes replacing uniforms, bodies thick with age but faces still showing the young men they were. Buch accepts the citation on behalf of the platoon, delivers remarks thanking the Army for finally recognizing what they accomplished, carefully not mentioning the 37 years it took. After the ceremony, the survivors gather privately and speak with brutal honesty. This should have been Medal of Honor. They held off an entire division with 18 men. If that does not warrant the highest recognition, what does? But they are grateful for any acknowledgement, for official validation that their fight mattered. The reason for the 37-year delay becomes clear only later when historians gain access to classified documents. Senior officers in 1st Army and V Corps knew about the intelligence warnings before December 16th. They knew prisoners reported offensive preparations. They knew radio intercepts suggested major German activity. They dismissed these warnings as exaggeration or deception. When the German attack achieved complete surprise, when American positions were overrun, when the situation threatened catastrophic defeat, those same officers needed explanations that protected their reputations. The official narrative that emerged emphasized German deception and overwhelming force, minimized American intelligence failures, attributed victory to quick reaction and superior American resilience. Fully acknowledging the 99th's role would require acknowledging that Green divisions performed better than intelligence predicted, that the quiet sector was anything but quiet, that warnings were ignored. Better to emphasize Bastogne, where a surrounded garrison held out heroically, a narrative with clear heroes and villains that does not implicate command decisions. Other 99th actions face similar recognition struggles. The defense of Krinkel-Rocherath, which delayed the 12th SS Panzer Division for 3 critical days, receives limited acknowledgement. The stand at Elsenborn Ridge, which stopped the entire northern offensive, is mentioned in histories but not elevated to the pantheon of famous American defenses. The assault on the Siegfried Line, which cost over 1,200 casualties in 2 weeks, is treated as one attack among many rather than a division-level achievement. The pattern is consistent. The 99th's contributions are acknowledged but not celebrated, recognized but not honored at the level their sacrifices warrant. Veterans understand why. They were teenagers fighting their first battle. Official histories prefer to focus on veteran divisions and famous commanders. Battle babies make poor heroes in narratives designed to glorify American military prowess. The comprehensive histories finally begin appearing in the 1990s and 2000s, written by historians with access to German records and declassified American documents, able to present fuller pictures unconstrained by need to protect reputations. These histories elevate the 99th's role, describing Elsenborn Ridge as the pivot point where German offensive power died, analyzing how delays at Lanzarote and the Twin Villages disrupted the entire German timetable, calculating that the 99th stand saved thousands of American lives by preventing deeper German penetration. But these histories appear 50 to 60 years after the battles, published when most veterans are elderly or dead, read by scholars and enthusiasts rather than general public. The recognition comes too late to benefit most of the men who fought, too late to correct the historical narrative that shaped public understanding for decades. 2003 brings publication of The Longest Winter, a book focused specifically on Buch's platoon and the Lanzarote stand. The book becomes a bestseller, finally bringing wider recognition to the action that Buch spent 60 years trying to document. Reviews praise the narrative as exemplifying American courage and sacrifice. Veterans read it with mixed emotions, pride that their story is finally being told, anger that it took 60 years, sadness that so many platoon members died without seeing this recognition. Buch, now in his 80s, does interviews where reporters ask how it feels to finally receive acknowledgement. He gives diplomatic answers about being grateful that history has been corrected. In private, he admits to friends that the recognition feels hollow, that what mattered was the fight itself and the men who stood beside him, that awards and books and public acclaim are poor substitutes for the recognition that should have come in 1945. The fight for recognition reveals uncomfortable truths about how military history is constructed. Official histories serve institutional purposes, protecting reputations, maintaining narratives that support current policy, emphasizing aspects that reflect well on decision-makers. Individual heroism is celebrated when it fits the narrative, ignored when it does not. The soldiers who actually fought discover their experiences are less important than the story the army wants to tell about those experiences. Boke's 37-year struggle is not unique. Countless veterans of countless battles discover that what they know happened differs from what official history says happened. That correcting the record requires bureaucratic battles, as frustrating as combat was terrifying. Most give up. Boke did not, and his persistence finally forced the army to acknowledge what it had tried to ignore. But the victory is incomplete. The recognition delayed until most men who deserved it were dead. On September 30th, 2019, Lyle Boke dies at age 92, the last surviving member of the intelligence and reconnaissance platoon that held Lanzerath. His obituary in national newspapers finally gives him the recognition he sought for 75 years, describing him as a hero of the Battle of the Bulge, whose stand helped save the Allied campaign. The recognition is accurate. It is also 40 years too late for most of the men who stood with him.